I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We do have a couple of announcements this morning. Results of closed sessions held on November 4, 2008, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, Oakdale Irrigation District et al. Versus County of Calaveras et al., Calaveras Superior Court Case number 35081, and Committee to Save Lake Tulloch versus County of Calaveras et al., Calaveras Superior Court Case number 35086, resulting in no action taken. A closed session, a conference with legal counsel on existing litigation, Collins versus County of Calaveras, case number 106 CV 1755, AWI SMS, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A, resulting in no action taken. We'll now turn our attention to the consent agenda. These are items that are expected to be non-controversial in nature, although that's not always the perception of everybody. So at this time, anyone who wishes to take an item off the consent agenda for further discussion may do so. Any board members?
Item 5.
Item 5 is removed. Any staff or members of the public?
Item 4, please.
Item 4. Anybody else? All right. Do I hear a motion on the balance?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote. Item number 4, Supervisor Thomas.
Okay. On this particular item, I'm just wondering if Mr. Sloan might be here this morning.
Is Mr. Sloan in the house? No.
Okay, then I'd like to ask Planning Director Selman some questions about this, please. Mr. Selman, this looks fairly straightforward that this gentleman is asking for a refund of some monies that weren't dispersed on some environmental work, subcontract work from Quadnoff. It looks to me as if about $8,000 was advanced on this starting in February of this year. This is a 4-acre subdivision. Can you expand on why this little 4-acre project took so long? Mr. Sloan's letter says something here about due to the time delays of the county and Quadnoff contract, our sellers have canceled the contract, and contract we had due to non-performance. We have lost a total of $87,000. Is this, do we have any explanation about why this person is finding himself in this position at this particular time?
Well, I have no idea what his contract costs were relative to the sale, so I can't speak to that. What we did do is when we received this application, this is one of a number of applications that we gave the applicant the opportunity to contract for environmental review rather than working with staff because of our current backlog, so that there is time to move these applications in a more timely fashion. When this application was received, the applicant and the engineer that represented him at the county and our consultants all began working on this. We got partway through the first stages of the review when we realized that we had a level of service F road problem that was beyond the capacity of this individual to fix. They determined that the county could set the requirements, we could go through the process, and set the requirements for the applicant to fix the road that serves as the access to the property. But it was really more than the applicant felt they could afford based on the project. So once we realized we had that, if you would, fatal flaw, we instantly stopped the processing to minimize our costs under the quad contract, and that's the basis of the refund. It was beyond the county's control in the sense that the county code and the general plan do require adequate access for land division, and that was the proposal. But in this case, the costs were going to be very significant, and presumably the project didn't pencil out. So we agreed that this was the most expeditious way to stop any further expenditure of private funds, and we recommend the withdrawal and certainly the refunds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll move the item, Mr. Chairman.
There's a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0. Item number 5, Supervisor Callaway.
Mr. Miller, please. I've already spoken with Mr. Miller a bit about some of my concerns, but I felt I needed to bring this to the board. I gather staff has no issue with the transfer because Waste Connections is an entity we're familiar with and they have a contract. I have some concerns with having an audited financial statement, and in that SEI, as I understand, Waste Connections will be keeping that name, Mr. Moore?
That's correct. They'll
Okay.
keep that as their
So I'm going to
DBA.
just refer to them as SEI then, not down here or Waste Connecticut. That SEI has a contract with the county for 75% of the CPI for the term of the contract, and then it could be a rolling another 5 years. When SEI comes to this board, or any of the haulers come to this board, the board has the authority to approve or not approve a potential rate increase based on the information that they give us. And since from your memo I understand Waste Connections is going to be accepting and not amending the existing contract with SEI in the county, to me it sounds like we're wanting to do this based on something that they might do, but we don't know that they will do. And so I don't understand why we would be requesting a audited financial statement. On page 3, it said, we'll be able to determine a reasonable increase under audited financial reports, Mr. Miller. The company would extraordinary need arise that may trigger a request for a rate increase beyond the allowed annual increase. Could we not at that time require one? I really don't understand why we would require one at this point, since Waste Connections is accepting the contract as is, the transfer's going as is, and it's not based on something that they might do.
It's very typical in a solid waste agreement to have an audited financial statement. In the agreement that we have with SCI, it's a 15-year agreement that every 5 years we can add another 5 years to it.
Correct.
So it's a rolling agreement. So in 2009, if we wanted it to be a perpetual 15-year agreement, we'd add another 5 years to it. When I was reviewing the permit agreement, the only requirement we have in the agreement currently is records on number of customers, the quantities, the types of materials they collect, and things like that. I just felt that with this opportunity for a transition, to have this as an amendment, we can get the information And when somebody comes to you with an extraordinary request, let's just say they came in and they said we need a 25% rate increase, we could ask for something at that time, and we might take a few months to review it and come back to you and say, okay, this is what we have. But without asking for that in advance, we can't show a linkage from year to year. I reviewed a number of other solid waste contracts in other agencies, as well as 2 agencies I previously worked in, and an audited financial statement is generally an annual requirement. In Waste Connections case, I talked with their representative this morning, and he said it's in some of theirs and it's not in some of their other agreements. I'm just using this is a board's option. I'm just saying that when staff has more information, we're in a better position to make a recommendation to you when it comes to rate increases.
I mean, I appreciate that, and I'm sure the board does. But since Waste Connections is a little bit more global in its ownership of hauler as a hauler versus the current SCI ownership, do they have to do they give us the information based on their California market, their U.S. market? Do they have to pull this out? Is that how they keep their books, or are they cumulative?
They're cumulative in that they file a 10K form with the SEC, which is a
Right.
Conglomerate. It's every contract they have, whether it's a landfill, a hauling contract, or whatever, and it aggregates all their contracts and all their costs and all their expenses by the defined categories. Even if they perform as a DBA, doing business as SEI, all this information that they carry locally isn't required to be audited, isn't required to be verified unless they have some internal controls for their own needs. So we talked this morning, and we've talked in the last 2 days with their representatives, and said they want to know if they could use their own auditor, and could they extract the information and provide that to us at the local level. And I said I was open to a number of options. I left the language as is in the amendment because I want the opportunity to say, let's see what you have. I said, as an example, if you wanted to submit the information that you have for SCI through 2007, we could look at that, see how accurate it is, how good it is, and say, yes, we'd be satisfied with you submitting this. However, I also told them, if you provide me your internal information and I use an outside auditor to validate and verify it, and it comes up that your information, the numbers are different than ours, then I would probably require it to be an outside audited independent financial statement. I'm just saying it's a good business practice. It's a good practice for both sides to have. It supports their argument when they come to make a rate increase if they can show us where they're losing money, and it supports our position if we can show they're making money.
I hear what you're saying.
Okay, I won't say it anymore.
No. I mean, I'm just one supervisor here. I just felt like having an audited annual financial report. It sounded like it had to be done every year. And in order to assess the necessity of a requested rate increase, they are not requesting a rate increase. And if they do request a rate increase above what's in the contract, then I would support it. I guess I'm not
okay, let me give you
why it should be supported at this point.
I'll make up a hypothetical scenario. SEI has certain expenses, and they've had acquisitions of equipment, things like that. Last year's amendment, this previous July, we had an inflation increase in the amendment as well as a percentage increase for the acquisition of a new vehicle. So Waste Connections comes in and they buy SEI. Now, we aren't party to that agreement. All we do is have the authority to assign it. So we don't know what the two parties agreed on a final amount for purchase. And I'll just make a number up. Let's say it's $1 billion. They have an internal process in Waste Connections and most of our other businesses on what they want to get as a rate of return for that $1 million investment over a certain time period. And if they want to try and capture that in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, they're going to come into us and say our costs are in excess of what this 1.5% CPI you give us each July is, because we had acquisition costs and this and that. We have a 15-year permit with you that in 2009, if you don't renew, a 10-year clock starts ticking down, and they may not be able to recoup their $1 million. And in this case, it may be multiple $1 million. I don't know. But in order to assess a rate increase, I would have to see those numbers and know what the difference is between what SEI's old operating costs are and what the operating costs are today with the acquisition costs added on top of it. The buyer has to get their money back over a specified period of time.
I understand that.
Okay.
In this case, though, the buyer, because of economy of scale, might be able to reduce some costs that the current owner can't do. I just feel like we have the option of turning it down. And I don't have a problem with doing an audited financial statement if they come in wanting a rate increase outside of the scope of the existing contract with SEI. I have a concern based on the a possible, a maybe, to request it at this point, since really what we're approving is the transfer.
In that case, what I would suggest is that our amendment is established typically in July for a change, and that we would, if the board chooses not to make this amendment to the agreement, that they would have to come to us at some point in July, give us the audited financial information for the 12 months previous, and then it would take us perhaps a month or two, and we wouldn't be able to give you an amendment recommendation until September, October, instead of in July.
If they choose to come in for a rate increase
Outside the CPI.
Correct. Would that be acceptable to Waste Connections?
I can't speak for them, but they're in the audience.
Oh,
They appear to be nodding their heads. Or at least one of them is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Before we do that, are you suggesting an amendment to the resolution before us at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you wish to state that at this point?
No, I guess I'd rather, it depends on what Waste Connections has to say or the other board members.
All right.
Well, wait a minute, I have some questions of Michael before we
All right.
proceed.
So we'll move to those questions, then bring you folks for further grilling.
Michael, my own sentiments are sympathetic to where Merida is, in the sense that we're a small county, and getting audited financial statements tends to be a fairly significant cost to require on an annual basis, if in fact they're living within the contract, which is, they get the cost of living increases, the 3/4 of whatever it is, or the like. So to me, the question seems to be is, well, what happens if they come in and say, geez, the costs have gone up in a significant enough manner that we need something more than what the contract allows, and so we would like to modify the contract, and they come to Public Works, and Public Works says, well, what do we have to base that modification on? It seems to me that one of the things you could say is, before we will grant an increase outside of the contract, we want 2 years of audited financial statements. I think they know when their costs are starting to get out of control, and they better get a couple of years of audited statements so you have more than 1 year and you have some continuity in which to review it. The other alternative basically is to say, we'll accept your audited statements as long as we find them acceptable. If we find them not acceptable, we have a right to ask for annual audited statements. And then we want an audited statement every 3 years, something like that. And if you come in for a rate increase outside of the contract, then we want a previous year's audited statement. It seems to me there should be some sort of compromise in here, so we're just not running up a whole lot of costs when we're not operating outside the contract. And if you want to get outside the contract, then fine. We want some real numbers, some real data, and we want an outside audited statement, maybe even 2 years of outside audited statements before we'll entertain that. But it seems to me that's fair enough, rather than saying, you're going to operate within the contract for 10 years, and by golly, we're going to have an audited statement every year for 10 years, and you're just operating within the contract.
Yeah, I would defer to the county council, because I don't know that if it's not something that's in the agreement, if I can request it, since it's extraordinary and outside the agreement that we have currently. If it's something that requires me coming back to you to say there's a request for an extraordinary rate increase outside our parameters, and I need you to approve us.
I mean, even if it's 1%, it doesn't have to be an extraordinary increase. You'd said something like 25%. I mean,
yeah, if it's
it could be a half of 1%, but if it's outside the contract, then we want additional justification, and that's fair and proper, in my opinion.
And you would delegate.
It does seem to me that we could amend this to be specific enough to not require a second round of board deliberation on it, if county council sees their way to it and the parties can agree to it.
Right.
Yeah, this began as a fairly simple request to assign the contract to the company that bought the entity that we do business with. And to his credit, Mr. Miller, I think, identified places where our contract could be strengthened to give the county a more clear-cut right to information in future years. So I worked with him a lot on this, and I thought it was always a good idea. This issue of the annual financial statements, audited financial statement, could be revised to make it optional at the request of the Director of Public Works when and if the time comes.
I would like the Director of Public Works to have a fair amount of discretion in this, so that if something isn't appropriate, why, you can say. We
could do this today and make the change. It just giving the department head the option of requesting.
But outside of the current contract.
Yes, outside of the current contract.
If the request comes in for a rate increase.
There's no reason to require it otherwise.
We could come up with language.
You think you can live with that?
I can do that.
Okay.
I want to hear from you.
Okay.
All right.
That completes my comment.
Please step forward, and Marita will grill you as well.
Good morning, Jason Kraft, Waste Connections, Calaveras Disposal. I think if I hear the question correctly, is Waste Connections agreeable to, if we come back to the board and request a rate increase outside of the current contract, the county has the right to ask us for audited financials?
Yes.
Yes, we're in agreement to that. And I think, there's been several discussions about the idea of having audited financials, and there is a significant cost that goes with that.
So you'll think twice before going outside the agreement, I would imagine.
As one of your ratepayers,
Yes.
think very hard.
We appreciate that. It's a large cost we don't want to pass on.
Oh, excuse me.
All right. Any other questions? Got off easy. All right. Any further board discussion before we move to action on this item?
I'd like to move this resolution amended per recommendation of Mr. Miller and County Council and the agreement from Waste Connections to transfer the contract from SEI Solid Waste, Inc. to Waste Connections.
Second.
Motion and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Already through the consent agenda.
All right, we now move to item number 6, public comment. This is for items not on the agenda, 5 minutes per person, 15 minutes per topic. Would anybody like to speak this morning?
I'm Paula Pattengale from the District 5 Domestic Animal Advisory Committee. This is my second appearance before you in complaint of the Board of Supervisors' failure to respond to correspondence from the Domestic Animal Advisory Committee. On May 16th, we sent communication to the board members regarding the link and the proposal for your support of a link workshop. We included with that correspondence a handout about the link. And for those of you who do not know what the link is, it's a correlation between animal abuse, family violence, and other forms of community violence. And there is a plethora of information to substantiate this. Child and animal protection professionals have recognized this link, and this is where the term "the link" comes from. Noting the abuse of children and animals is connected in a self-perpetuating cycle of violence. When animals in a home are abused or neglected, it is a warning sign that the household may not be safe. In addition, children who witness animal abuse are at great risk to become abusers themselves. Unfortunately, once they start with animal abuse, they often work up to human violence themselves. So it's very important that the community and county employees who deal with violence in any form be informed about the link. We have available to us a nationally and internationally recognized authority on the link. His name is Phil Arco from the National Office of the American Humane Society. He has agreed to come to Calaveras County January 15th to do a presentation on the link. He would do it from 8 to noon on a Thursday morning. And I would like your support, both financially and with enthusiastic support, for this workshop. The cost is anticipated to be $1,000. He's flying from New Jersey. He will spend one night here, and then he will spend the day, half a day in the workshop. His presence is confirmed. The cost could be divided between each of the districts at the rate of $200 per representative from each of the districts. This amounts to $200 from your discretionary funds. But the link is important for all county residents because the dynamics between companion animals and people has changed over the past years. In the past, animals were strictly utilitarian. They've now become members of the household. They have become part of the family. And this is where this dynamic seems to arise. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the response of animal services to animal abuse tends to be rather laggardly. And also participation in other violence committees. For example, we have what's called a DIVERT committee. DIVERT is an acronym for Domestic Violence Enhanced Response Team. And technically, we should have an animal services representative on that committee. It's a fast track for for violence and getting those who are at risk out of a violent situation. Now, the Women's Crisis Center recognizes the link. They put in 2 animal kennels behind their shelter, their women's shelter. But we don't have active support from animal services. And what we need to do is get all community members and all county employees, whether judicial or domestic violence, child and elder abuse, and mental health members involved in understanding what the link is. That's the first step in addressing the problem.
Because we're short on time and we only have, I will guarantee you, I will take the lead on this. I'm working with the Sheriff's Office and our Social Services Department.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing impaired.
Oh, that's all right. I'm speaking impaired. On the 5th, we're short on time for 5 minutes. I will work with the Sheriff's Office and Social Services Department to participate on January 15th in the morning.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a location?
Yes, it will be in the...
CalWorks building where you meet?
It will be in the Sequoia room.
Sequoia room. Got it. It is a done deal.
Supervisor Callaway, will you also place on the agenda, I believe there was a request for funding for this, and that it can't happen without funding?
I will. We will try and figure it out.
Okay. Well, in any event, let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Hearing impaired.
Thank you.
Function. I am grateful for your support. Thank you very much. It's certainly a stepping stone to problem resolution.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak under public comment? Oh,
This is good.
yes. Is somebody responsible for the slideshow here? Not clear what the link to public comment is. It's quite scenic, but...
That would be... I'm not going to admit anything. I will call you out then. That's for probation.
All right, could we turn that off for a moment, since it's somewhat distracting?
You just go to my item.
Nice try, but we're still on public comment here.
Okay. That's okay, my spyware picked it up. Put something in front of her for Jackie.
Thank you, Mr. Krilitich. So, last call for public comment. Would anybody else like to address the board on an item not on the agenda? All right. Hearing none, we'll move to item number 7. This is a discussion and possible action regarding a resolution appointing Ms. Barretts to the Calaveras County Veterans Service Officer, or as the County Veterans Service Officer. Shelley.
Good morning. My name is Mary Sawicki. I'm the Director of Calaveras Works and Human Services. We're here today to recommend to you for board approval appointing Shelley Barretts as the Calaveras County Veterans Services Officer. Ms. Barretts is a 15-year Navy veteran. She's worked at Calaveras Works and Human Services as an eligibility worker for the last 5 years. The actual funding for the Veterans Program comes from the Medi-Cal Cost Avoidance Program, and actually this past year we, in taking a look at our labor, tried to put together the issue of providing services to folks directly by one worker rather than several. We find this particular mechanism very cost effective. She's been doing the services for pretty close to a year now. She also recently passed the state certification and is working on her national certification. So we are asking that you appoint her in this position.
All right, thank you, and congratulations on your certification. Any board discussion?
I'll move this item.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 5-0. Item number 8, this is a continued discussion regarding a review of the California County Juvenile Detention Needs Assessment, and this would be your opportunity, Mike.
Would you mind?
Now if you can get it to work.
Well, that's way to go back on.
I like the slideshow better.
Yeah, well, this is
Follow it.
see all the way across the room.
I want the river canyons. I think we should build a facility there.
That is the facility. That is our facility. Well, that would be the harsh
Well, waiting for that to come on, my chief probation officer. So the question is, where is that picture?
Yes, I just asked that.
Don't know for sure.
Steve.
I'm taking a wild guess it's the moat, but I don't know for
There's the
sure.
moment. Whereabouts?
Upstream.
Upstream of the Delta.
That's actually below Mill Bar.
Yeah.
Before the.
Right, just as you
after
go.
that, you turn down there, that's where it gets wide, and then you go narrow in. So that's on the coastal crestway.
Can't go stay up. Give me a break. I can't get away from it.
So while this is thinking, CSD is helping me on this. Last week I brought to you some information that was probably not enough for everybody to think about. It wasn't enough for myself, but at the same time, I'm going to start getting this information to the board based on that times coming very near to put an application on as part of a $30 million grant. We've been meeting with Tuolumne County to talk about resurrecting some of the partnership that we had from 10 years ago. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is I put together as much information and better information than we had last week based on the meeting that we had with Tuolumne County between the last time I was before the board 2 weeks ago and today. So that's where we're at today. So in the probation department last year, and I tried to squeeze every dollar I could out of really what it's costing us for detention now. We spent $152,000, and this will be 0708 because this is a full year, so not adjustments for upcoming year. We spent $152,616 on halls. Camps are, we use 2 camps. Shasta County has a boys camp, and we also used Camp Singer, which is at Youth Center. So our transportation costs, this is where we get hit a little bit, which is if you have your own hall, especially in your own county, your transportation costs go down to nothing. Well, ours will never do that. But we're looking at $17,000 and some change fuel maintenance, you can see. Medical is some of the incidents that we'll have, whether it be at a hall. Some of the things are beyond what our juvenile hall contracts cover. The other is some meals or whatever for kids or something that came up. I added home electronic monitoring because those are counted as detention days, so that's what we spend on. Those are minors that, for whatever reason, stayed home, but under electronic monitoring bracelet. And then our extra hire costs for that year were $37,604. For that year, we did a total of 2,871 detention days. And then where you see where it says 0809 rate adjustment, what I did is the 0708, our contract with Nevada County was $100 a day. It went up to $120 this year. So I adjusted so the difference would have been $21,000 on those. So that came to $38,000. So that was pretty much, that's what we were paying. Now, what we presented last time I was here 2 weeks ago was in the needs assessment, it talked about a 40-bed hall. But we had not received the information from Tuolumne because we hadn't put together the whole budget yet. But what I presented to you was an average of what 3 other counties that had similar size halls, similar, I used 2 counties. I didn't use Marin's because they have a 40-bed hall, but their salary rates are a little bit higher than, say, El Dorado County or Nevada County. And actually, since we use Nevada and El Dorado counties, that's why I use those. So I think there was some sticker shock of what if it was a 50% share. We spent time, Assistant Chief Hall and myself and Chief of Tuolumne County and people from the administrative staff over there worked on we had a meeting with our administrative staff too and went and looked at, well, maybe we need to look at a 30-bed hall. So we've got to get costs down. Based on the meeting we had last week, it looked like it's going to be about $1.6 million to run the hall. So that did not include our transportation costs, any infrastructure or other startup. So a full year of 30 beds a day is 10,950 beds. It came out to $153 a day for bed space. Now you add the transportation costs, and what I did is I figured it's about 7% of what we've done over time has been, so that comes out to $11.62 per day. It's cheap for one day, but you don't count every day. But when we make runs, there's a lot of hours and time. So I just had to put something so we have a baseline. So that came out that the operations budget would cost us end up about $165 a day.
Mike, does that include staff's time to take them back and forth?
Correct. Yeah, that's about $11.62 per day. But then I said, well, we've got to look at some enhanced bed costs. So I used those 2,871 bed days, came out to actually we're using about 8 beds a day. And as far as the needs assessment goes that Mr. Runyon put together, it's about right on track with what he said. So I took that $338,000 and looked at, there was 2 other things that we had not figured in. One is the Department of Juvenile Justice, which used to be the Youth Authority. We have a contract with them for emergency detention. That's the last thing I ever want to do, but just to give you an example, we had a young man that was arrested for robbing a bank with a gun, and we had him in the hall. I think some of you remember that. He was a minor for a while until he became an adult, but we were trying him as an adult. He started tearing up the juvenile halls he was in because he thought he was tough because now he's an adult, even though he wasn't. So he left no option for us, but he was taken to Preston. I was going to say Preston School of Industry. I wish it was still the Preston School of Industry. It's Preston Correctional Facility. And he was placed there. It was a good deal for his attorney because he was close by, but that cost us a lot of money. So just in case, I think we have put about $2,000 a year aside in case we ever have one of those situations again. Also, I feel that we should start thinking about putting at least $10,000 a year in some kind of side purse to start going towards purchasing vehicles, because we are eating vehicles. And the last 2 vehicles that I bought, actually 3 vehicles I bought for the department, I did with someone else's money. Well, that money is pretty much dried up, so we're going to have to start replacing some of the fleet of cars that we have for transport. With all that said, what we're paying now, and that's even with some of it going up to $120 a day at Nevada County, it's only $122 a day. Because in there, if you remember from the first or second slide, we're still using camp beds. If we wanted partners with the juvenile hall, we would probably use camps less. And camps are running about $100 a day, so that's why it brings that cost down. So then I put together some options to look at. So one of the things we had discussed the first time I came was, should we split the 50-50 at least the first year? Because how do you really figure out what operations costs are going to be? You're going to have training, so probably the first 3 or 4 months that it's an operation, we probably wouldn't even have kids there. We'd probably be doing training, getting, shaking out policies and procedures and all that. So we had discussed that maybe we would go half and half. Pretty much got the vibe that probably wasn't a good idea here for us, especially with Tuolumne County needing 19 beds and us needing 8. So I just put it down to 1/3 share. So based on that $1.6 million that we've talked about, our share, based on needs assessment, was about $559,000.
And any indication from the meeting that you had with Tuolumne that they would be amenable to the 1/3?
Yes, we just got, and actually, I didn't update this because it was sitting down here annoying everybody. We got an email just before I came here with, I went through the budget, well, Terry and I went through the budget that we had done. They made some adjustments to it, so we just got it this morning, just before we came here, and they were still basing it, the share on half and half for the first year, which was more than this. And actually, the budget that they sent us was $600,000. Our share would have been $600,074. So it was actually $1.2 million as opposed to 1.6, based on some high revenues coming in. So I don't want to complicate things anymore because I don't know how good those numbers are. Those numbers are just as good as these, I think. What this does not include is infrastructure like sewer, water, cash match, case management software, computer hardware, hiring, furniture, phones. It's all those kind of things. So then what I've done for each one of these options, I have 3 options for you to look at, is kind of so the liability, I think, for this generally is going to be pretty high. We'd be, if we were full partners, we'd be sharing with whatever pain, with whatever goodness is going on with that, but we'd be sharing with whatever pain goes with owning a hall. The unknowns in this are very high. We don't know what construction's going to cost, what it's going to cost to hook up the sewer, is there water, what's going to happen with the piece of property. Cost predictability is fair. I mean, I think if we were full partners, we'd have a lot of say-so in the budget. We'd be able to kind of anticipate what it's going to cost us each year, but you also don't know what's going to happen if a minor gets hurt in the facility for whatever reason, and whatever lawsuits there could be, whatever. That'd be a whole new thing that we wouldn't know about. And the access to beds would be very high. So that would be the real good side of that, is that we actually wouldn't have to worry about beds. Next option is if we did a contractual bed commitment with them. Right now at Nevada County, we're committed to 4 beds a year, 4 beds a day all year, whether there's somebody making them warm or not. But there's usually somebody in them. So I looked at 2 options here. In 2020, it shows that we need 10 beds on our needs assessment. This one is about now to about 20, just before 2020 is 8 beds. So you can see what that would cost if we went with 10 beds, $602,000. Based on those numbers I gave you, $480 and some change for the option B there. The liability is lower than ownership. This is the situation we're similar to what we would be in now. since we don't have a lot of control over the facilities we go to, we probably aren't, I mean, anybody could sue anybody, but I think it's diminished. The unknowns are decreased because we know we have 8 or 10 beds a day. Cost predictability is good. We know ahead of time if they were going to raise the rates, and we work on the contract with them. And the access to beds is high on that. So next one is, so option 1, that full partnership. So what I did here is I compared the other options to option 1, the ownership. So if option 1 was $598,000, if we went to that option 2, it's $3,847. You know, it would cost more on that option 2A. 2B, which is the 8-bed contractual, it comes out to $117,000. That's the difference of what we're paying now to here, so it would cost us that much more, and we'd be in the hole. Option 3A is $153,000, and option 3B is $242,000. So the option 3s, what we're doing now, I don't think is a really good idea, because those are going to keep going up, and like I said, those numbers are kind of hard to tell with, I've talked to the contract beds we have now, and they may have to start charging within a year or so what it really costs them, because we are getting a deal now because we're just filling in some space that isn't there. So we're not really paying their real costs per day. Whereas if we were, members of the hall, we'd be paying the real hard costs. So now I can kind of put this all together for you, and I think I'll move over to so basically, before I get into what I'll recommend to you totally, meeting with Bob and Jim and Craig Pedro from Tuolumne County, they had some questions at our last meeting, and the first one was risk exposure. They talked about, well, what's our risk exposure? And I would say that over the years, I mean, since we've never had a hall, our exposure to risk has been minimized. I mean, thank God we've got, through good hiring, good philosophy in the department, and training. We train our aides, and we train staff. We do a pretty good job of, caring for people as much as we can, and so some of our risks have been minimized. We were always kind of crossing our fingers that nothing will happen, but thank God that works out. I'm not a risk manager. I don't know enough how to calculate risk, so I couldn't go and say if we had a contractual situation with them, but I would imagine it would be pretty high, our risk factors. Construction costs, when I wrote this out yesterday, I did not have the information of what, we had the square footage of what a 30-bed hall would look like, but we didn't have what's it going to cost? What would we ask for in the grant? Well, that came in also very late yesterday. And just to give you an idea, just to go back a little bit in history, 60-bed hall 10 years ago was going to cost $5.5 million. The 30-bed hall now would be $18 million. So that would be our request for the grant. So Calaveras County's contribution, I talked about some of that there. We don't know what some of our contribution would be. If we got funded for the whole grant, there would be no construction money, but there's some of that infrastructure costs that could be potentially pretty high. So that's unknown. So the state contribution, if we ask for $18 million, that's over half of the whole pot. And I know of at least 5 counties that are applying for the money. And the chief of Shasta County, his project's more than $30 million. So basically, he wants it all. And you talk to anybody who's got any of these projects, they're all valid, need-based, and actually some of the stuff that you talk to them about, what they want to do, sounds great. So it's going to be very competitive. So $30 million available. It looks like our request would be $18 million. So I don't want to say, well, we wouldn't stand a chance, but I think the reality is I don't know if they'll give us $18 million when there's so much need out there for and actually one of the other counties that's going is a county that does not have a hall also, so Colusa County is going to be applying. Now I've got some overall concerns. Prior to the grant application being turned in, the chief probation officer and the assistant chief probation officer at Tuolumne County are going to have already retired. So by the end of next month, Shirley Jewell and Leanna Salazar will be gone. Not there. That's wonderful for them. It's actually kind of beautiful. But that would leave a lot of the work, if we went through with this, on Terry Hall and myself. And with the work we have to do here and trying to really attack some of the root causes of what's causing people to get into juvenile hall and or jails and just running the department on a day-to-day basis, neither one of us would have the time to do this. Could we do it if it was here? Yeah, we'd be all over it if we made that decision. But at the same time, it's also back and forth to Tuolumne, and not that Tuolumne wouldn't hire some good people and coming in, but I don't know what's going to happen. And we have a wonderful relationship with the probation department there now. Philosophies are real similar, but when you have the two top people leaving, I don't know. That leaves me a little edgy. Another thing is that if we apply for this and get awarded the grant, and then we find out, wow, this is really going to cost a lot more than we anticipated because something came up with the sewer, or there's some water hookup costs more, or what's the roads going to cost in there, or there's some new environmental impact, or whatever, and we turned it down, as was done before. I think in the future, trying to get grants, we might have a pretty black mark on our name. I know that it probably can't be written anywhere, but someone reviewing that, because in every grant I've ever applied, have you applied for grants before? Were you accepted? If so, what'd you do with them? And if we said, well, we applied for 2 construction grants and turned them both back, I don't think that's a good idea. So what's sensible in this whole thing? It just appears to me right now, and I hate to say this, it's just this isn't feasible at this time. It's just not, it's not good business. In my heart, do I know that the right thing to do is have our own hall and have some control over what's going on of the, to help, hold kids accountable, but also start repairing them and start helping families? Is that the right thing to do? Yes. There's an economic crisis going on now that I don't want to take money away from other county departments just to do some detention, and when we can work hard and keep doing what we're doing. But in a few years, we're going to have to deal with this again sometime. But I just think right now, it doesn't make sense. There's the cost of the work that has to be done in finding beds in the future, and the cost of those, uncertainty of what beds are going to cost. Is that going to be an issue? Yeah. So I think what would make sense right now is if we've contacted Tuolumne. We're actually having a meeting tomorrow at our office with the architectural firm that was contracted to put together the grant application and who's doing the architectural programming and such. We're having a meeting tomorrow. With board direction, I think we could tell them, sorry, we can't be part of this, because through this whole process, several times I made mention to the people at Tuolumne, what happens if we don't play in this project? And every time they said, well, we're going to do this anyway. We'll build a hall here. So I think this isn't, no way am I saying anything wrong about Tuolumne. I'm just saying that right now, financially, this doesn't make sense. I can't recommend to the board, and I'm sure Bob will have something to say about it, but we worked closely on this, and it hasn't been easy. I mean, it's not a fun thing to say this, but at the same time, how sweet would it be if we had 8 beds and Tuolumne was successful, and we could tell them, we'll give you we'll
contract.
We'll take 8 beds. Yeah. And if they could put that in their agreement, if they through with this and build this 30-bed place. They've already got a letter from, it's kind of a, I'll kind of cap on Amador a little bit. It's fun to do once in a while. They gave kind of a wishy-washy letter saying we would be interested in renting maybe up to 5 beds if you guys did this. I think a letter from us to them saying, if this happens and you build this, we will contract for 8 beds per day at whatever their rate is, and whether it's the 153 or it could be more depending on whatever construction cost. I think the sensible thing to think would probably be more. Knowing that ours are going to go up, the space now is about 117,000. Well, we've been getting off cheap for a long time, so maybe that space between isn't really that much. So with that, I just think that my recommendation would be that we not go with the application as a partner, but we could go with a contract. Additionally, it would make sense to me that we start putting whether we create a designated fund or however it's done, that we start putting some money aside for whether it's vehicles, because that's a real deal. It's not going to be pretty when a wheel falls off of some vehicle and they're going to say, well, what was your maintenance record? How old did you have this vehicle? It makes sense to do that. But the other thing is we'll never put enough aside to build a hall, but to have some money for infrastructure in the future and all that. So with that, I'm sure I talked enough.
Thank you, Michael. Supervisor Tryon.
Michael, I agree with your recommendation, but I want to go back over a number. You basically said for 30 beds, the capital cost of building the facility is $18 million. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. And I didn't even get a chance to review it yet. Terry opened it up. We looked at it. We read in the email, it was about 13 point some million for actual cost. And there's a percentage that you do for, hey, you don't know what's going to happen. So it came out to about 18 million based on
$18 million for 30 beds.
It came out to about,
for a juvenile, that's $600,000 per bed.
Yeah, it came out to 500.
Is that the cost structure we're looking at to actually do a juvenile facility? I mean, that just strikes me as astronomical.
Well, that's and I said I haven't looked at that, but that's the first draft. And we were pretty clear was Beverly Pryor and architects who did it before. She didn't go extravagant in the past. I know some of this stuff I don't want to use. She would build energy efficiencies, and she wasn't starting with valued engineering right off the top, because sometimes with valued engineering it's going to, for example, in Nevada County, they value engineered right away, and now heating their water there they can barely afford it. And the system they put in, all the electricity and gas they're using just to move water in the facility and heat it. So they wish now that they would have done a more efficient system at the get-go. So without looking, and tomorrow we'll discuss that with Beverly, but yeah, it's...
Well, I agree with your recommendation, so the cost structure we have.
Other comments from the board?
Only that I agree also. The more you talk, the more I felt like I was on the Titanic here. So at this point, you're absolutely right. It would be great to have our own facility here where we could have some control over the detention and care for these clients of yours. But there are just far too many unknown components. It's much too nebulous at this point. So I agree wholeheartedly with your recommendation.
Other supervisors wish to weigh in?
Yeah, I do. There's a whole lot of differences this time, right?
Yes, sir.
That the infrastructure costs were to be borne by the county. In Tuolumne's case, they're building a justice center. So the infrastructure costs would be theirs, or should be theirs. I'm concerned about actual costs of our bed rates versus the current rate that we're paying. I mean, we're doing that in all our departments. What are the actual costs versus what are we charging? So, as you mentioned, considering what's happening with state funding and local funding, I'm assuming the facilities we use are going to move to actual costs. $130 or $60 is going to be cheap.
No, just to give you an idea, the federal government's paying Yolo County $200 a day to house minors.
When federal does it, they always pay more, whether it's prisons or jails or juvie facilities. But, so I don't know that we would have to eat the infrastructure costs. On the JPA for liability, we set up a JPA system where we're responsible for our own. It wouldn't be, unless it was something done intentionally on behalf of the county whose houses the facility. Why can't we go in as a third versus 50-50? If we bring down our proportionate share versus what Tuolumne's saying is still 50-50, their chances of getting a facility are much greater if Calaveras is part of that and it's a regional facility. So are they not open to that?
Well, we've worked on, poor Jim's probably tired of hearing JPA. We've gone back and forth with Tuolumne on that. So some of the issues in there are still that we share in the infrastructure costs.
Why?
And do that, well, because they don't have the money.
But if they're going to build it and they're putting it in a justice center, then let them, I mean, if they want us to be a partner, I guess what I'm asking is where's the negotiation here? I mean, the kitchen facility could be done at their jail. I mean, we've talked about that. Laundry facility, some of those high-ticket items. I mean, it doesn't sound like to me we've negotiated with Tuolumne County. We're just, and if they want to build and they want a facility and they have a better chance of getting it on a regional basis, why would they not negotiate with Calaveras County? And if we could bring our commitment down to a third, then these figures change. And then it, yeah.
I just want to, we're talking about the justice facility in Tuolumne County.
Yes.
Their juvenile hall would be significantly, I think, in advance of the rest of their justice facility. Their jail construction is nowhere near as advanced as ours is.
I understand.
So they would have to build their own kitchen.
I understand.
They'd have to build all their own stuff.
I understand
into
that.
the juvenile hall.
I understand that. They were going to do it before. Amador was going to do, oh no, well, that is another issue. And then Calaveras tried to work with the City of Angels. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like to me that we're negotiating and it's 50% and we're going to have to pay for this and that. I mean, if that's the way it is, I accept your recommendation.
Well,
if there's some room to negotiate with them and to bring it down to a third, and so you form your JPA and they have 2/3 membership, we have 1/3 membership, they're going to put the infrastructure in anyway. All we become is almost like the silent partner that gives them the ability to go for a regional facility and have a better chance, and then we all win. So, I mean, I'm not hearing anything.
Can I respond to that, at least in part? There has been some negotiation, but it's been on the periphery. We haven't really gotten down to the central issues that you've raised, such as the cost of construction and infrastructure. We haven't really even identified those until we had some board direction. So that the door's not closed, but the current JPA, the draft JPA, does call for a 50-50 split on that. That can obviously, if the board directs us, we can go back and offer and shoot for something else.
And Mike, your description of option one is full partner. You really are making financial assumptions of a third share. Am I correct?
Exactly.
So the numbers you're giving us are not 50%. Your operating cost share really is, assuming we did negotiate to a third. If it were the half, it would be higher by about 25%.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why I think that if we went to them and said, we'll guarantee you, we could probably write up it, whether, I don't know, it would be a JPA or some kind of contract, whatever, that would be to work with Jim that would be solid to say, look, we will pay you this, for a grant application, that it would make it more successful there. And I tried to look yesterday in regional, to get defined regional, is kind of vague, because Nevada County, got regional points by having Sierra County use one bid. So, and Sierra County just pays them, but as far as the application goes, I mean, I think regional is important, but at the same time, it's only 50 points out of 1,000 on the application. So is that a make or break? It could be, but...
I mean, we're making a short-term decision because money is tight. By the time this gets approved and built, we're probably talking 5 years down the road, 4 to 5 years down the road. And the need is 15 to 30 years down the road. I mean, if they're not wanting to negotiate, I would agree with you, but it doesn't sound like to me we've done any due diligence. And if they don't need us, that's fine. Then we'll contract for whatever it is that you deem is appropriate.
Well, and just from the informal talks we've had, I bet there's not anybody in this room that isn't affected about what's going on with the current economics of the world. And it's not easy for anybody, especially government right now. El Dorado County is laying off 100 people. Last week was in the news. I think they went and did that. There's talk here of some. So, I mean, I think everybody's hurting. So I don't know if anybody's in a position to negotiate for those kind of dollars. The other thing is, what scares me is, even if it went less than $18 million to the request would be, and we cut out, because I think that money does include a kitchen, took that out. You still have to have some kitchen facilities to heat food, so there would be some savings. So take that down to $15 million. I don't really think the chances of us getting half of the $30 million that's not fair to anybody else. We saw what kind of happened with the AB 900 issues, and so even if we could negotiate all these other things, we could end up with $6, $7, $8 million extra to build it, and nobody has that.
Supervisor Thomas.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to kind of pull this discussion in a completely different direction. We've been our attention has been drawn to a lot of unknowns here, and how do we possibly make a decision when we have so many unknowns? The thing that I do know fairly certainly is that we're going to build a jail up on this hill here. We've made a commitment to that, and when that is ready to be occupied, we're going to have a facility right next door here that somebody's going to be wondering, what do we do with that albatross? Although it was built in 1964, it's a very substantial structure. I would submit to you that Supervisor Tryon said that according to this $18 million divided by 30, that's $600,000 a bid. If you would start with a piece of onion skin over the top of that existing footprint over there and just do a quick architectural evaluation of where are the toilets, where are the plumbing now, how could we reconfigure the inside of that shell, which is very secure. It's the land costs are paid, the infrastructure costs are paid, and you've got Amador and Tuolumne clamoring for spaces. We've got 60 people housed over there now. If you gutted it, and I know I'm fully aware that there's asbestos there. I've heard $85,000 to get rid of that. What's $85,000 compared to $600,000 a bid? You could gut it. You could create a facility there that would house 30 young men and or women for decades for a fraction of the cost that you're talking about. What's wrong with just thinking out of the box a little bit? We're living within our means to use our resources that we have under our nose here. It would cost $2 million to tear it down. Why not spend a few bucks and make it something that we can use?
Well, when we looked at the Tri-County situation we talked about at that time, and I was working in Amador, of looking at using the jail and building a new jail. And the jails in Amador is way newer than here. And using that, at that time, we were told by the Board of Correction Standards Authority now that cannot be done. The square footage of the cells are different for minors. You have to have classroom facilities. It's not as hard a facility. So I would feel safe to say that to retrofit that to allow juveniles, plus you also have to have so much outside area, way more. You have to have dirt that minors can be on there. We're dealing with children versus adults. It's a whole different thing. So there's probably not the room, and then just the maintenance cost. Being from a background of building maintenance of that building's a nightmare. I mean, I would think you would have to gut all the walls and then put new plumbing in and stuff. I would never want to go through, try to work on the plumbing in that building. But anyway, is that worth looking at? Maybe, but I don't think it would take very much investigation to find out that it probably isn't feasible, because it wasn't feasible 10 years ago.
We have a much different economic environment today than we had 10 years ago. So maybe it's because my name is Thomas, but I tend to doubt those things. When people say, we can't get there from here. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, and that's probably worth. But then there's also the laws that govern size and space and all that.
Well, you heard me start off by saying, leave the outside walls and start with an onion skin piece of paper and just look at the feasibility of it. Let's look and see what we can do, particularly in view of the fact that would be a larger facility than we need. And it seems to me that we could put ourselves in a position where we'd be housing other people's children and charging them to do it. So I don't know. It's just. I'm a bricklayer. I can do it.
There you go. Yeah, there's a few of those in there. The other thing we have talked, and I've talked with Sheriff Downham about, we've got some land managers building this new facility. When it gets designed, who's ever going to end up designing it, to make sure for our needs, is there some space up there that if we were ever going to build a facility that could be sight and sound separation, but use the facilities at the jail, and then there would be some revenue back to the jail for whatever if it was laundry, food, whatever. So, and then you could build a newer facility, and I think there's the thing that we would look at. What would it cost to retrofit what we have now versus building something that could use that, the facilities at the new jail. And then also, the other thing that would be sweet for us too is to be able to walk minors to court as opposed to using vehicles. So I think those are some things to look at. But I think right now, I don't know if this is short-sighted, because I've got a feeling, maybe I've been reading too many books about the Depression lately, but we're not going to come out of this in any time soon. That's just my gut. So I'm going with, sometimes you got to go with the gut, and this pains me. And I think Marita knows where, we've been on this. Thank God our staff does a good job in trying to do it. What's hurt us, and I think I mentioned it last time, our rearrest rate for our minors here is 20.3%. That's unheard of. I talked to some people in Virginia. They said, "What?" I go, "Well, I'm telling you, I got good staff." And we've got decent kids, believe it or not. We've got some kids that are getting in some serious trouble now, but the fact of the matter is,
you might want to say for the folks that don't work in that area whether that's good or bad. 20.3%.
Oh, that's real good. That means, when the average statewide is in the 70s. So we're doing okay. And, so we'll keep working on some alternatives, but don't be surprised if there's some stuff. I can't take too many more cuts in the budget and staffing, because if we start going, so there's going to be a whole nother aspect of budgeting this year if we aren't doing this. But it costs money to help people try to change their lives, and I just think at this point, this much money is probably too much.
I think I'll weigh in on this as well, since everybody else has. I actually look at the at this in kind of two ways. One, it's clear we can't afford either the maintenance, or the ongoing costs or the construction of this at the moment. And the chances of getting the amount necessary, I agree with your analysis that it's pretty remote. That said, I don't think that there's been any major recession in this last century that didn't see an uptick in the need for these kinds of facilities, although I also agree that having a 20% rate is a lot better than a 70% rate, and that has more to do with investments in prevention and sort of rehab stuff and getting people jobs and counseling and the kinds of reconnection to society that your staff is doing a pretty good job of. So how we spend our money and how we look at our internal efficiencies is very much important to me. I personally regret putting, and even though this reflects the kind of funding sources and the timing of it, I think I'd rather be Tuolumne trying to do a comprehensive integrated system than Calaveras putting all its eggs in the jail basket with the efforts to keep people juveniles from getting into that system being shorted. To me, it doesn't make long-term economic sense. It doesn't make social justice or economic sense. I'm just not sure what sense we've come to here. This is a painful moment, and more than you've expressed. I know people have put a lot of time and energy into trying to make this happen, and that it's hard to give up that dream, especially knowing the consequences of having no alternative. That this is a sobering moment, and it does give pause for us to think as we make decisions in the future to try to do it more collaboratively, more cooperatively, even within our own house, let alone with the kinds of JPAs and joint efforts with other counties. I'd like to encourage you to look into Supervisor Thomas's suggestion. I know it's a messy building, but there are some remarkable architects in Calaveras County that may be able to come up with some pretty innovative approaches. I'd like to at least see what those costs might be. And it would put us in a position, I don't want to bet our probation future, our housing future, on counties that have so many question marks, like who's going to be there and what their philosophy is going to be. I think we've got a pretty special approach here, and that's proven out in the stats. Why wouldn't we lay claim to this and have this be the center of tri-county activity in the area of probation? And wouldn't that be both economically and ultimately in the outcome probably the best route to go? So if this has any possibility, I'd sure like to at least find out what that looks like.
So you want us to budget some money so he can hire an architect to look at what Russ is recommending?
That's, Maria, that is not necessary. I mean, we have architects in this county that are invested sufficiently in this that they would, I'm sure that they would be glad to spend 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever, on a feasibility, just a discussion. You get me a set of plans, I'll bring you back a feasibility analysis.
Yeah. And I think the place to start with that would be also to talk with the people who control whether you can do that or not.
Right.
And
start with the department.
Let's find out what the parameters of this are.
Start with them and have them come look at the facility before you come back with any proposal for spending money.
The Correction Standards Authority would send somebody out here just to look at it and give a, hey, yeah, maybe if you left one wall up and took all the rest of them, and but or they might say, oh yeah, just take a dozer inside. And
at the risk of being redundant.
I would like to finish my comments, which were just two things. One is I would support a letter on option B with a firm commitment on 8 beds, and I would also like to follow up on the explorations, first with the department and then reviewing it. I do believe there are architects that would be happy to help us do a preliminary analysis. That doesn't get a design made, but it gives us sort of parameters of what kind of architectural options might be there and what kinds of costs might accompany that. So those are my two suggestions, and I would hope that the board might move, at least give you that. Anybody else wish to weigh in?
Your suggestion, Steve, to commit to lease, rent, whatever.
Yes, option.
Based on this.
That's correct.
On this map here, the figures.
It's option 2.
Figures that we have.
Option 2B, which was the recommendation that the chief probation officer made earlier in the session. And it's simply authorizing a letter to go out saying that should it get built and should those be the costs, we're in for 8.
Michael, is that your recommendation?
Well, the only thing I would say yes, except since this is all really generalized,
right.
I don't think saying if those were the costs. I think, to tell you the truth, whatever the costs are there, I bet it would be cheaper to run over there
than all the way.
It was higher. So I think and what we're talking about, I mean, this is really a gamble. To throw in your money, it's like going to a card game. It's all in the pot, and everybody's going to turn over a card, and some people are going to get some money and some aren't. I guess that's a frustrating thing where Marita said before there was a lot of money that was out there, and a lot of counties got money. This one, $30 million statewide, is a pittance. So, I think if we just said, hey, if this happens, we're in for 30 bids.
8.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Calm down.
Sorry. Whoops. Yeah, we'll pay the whole thing.
But I don't want to make a commitment without knowing the cost. I mean, I don't want to just say we're just in for 8 beds. Let us know in the future what it's going to cost us. I mean, you need to have some cost data, and we need to know what we're contracting for. Yeah. And if that is a contract, I think it would have probably to come back to this board for adoption. It would go through the normal agenda process, and I'm certain that within that process they're going to want to, I would hope, know what the costs are, how we're going to fund the cost. Are these costs competitive with Nevada or other available opportunities? I mean, I don't want you to send out a letter that just basically makes a commitment, an ironclad commitment that, on a letter. I mean, there's going to have to be a contract, but we would be very interested, and we would like to negotiate with you the possibility of, tying up 8 beds.
I think I could work with county council and county administrative officer on drafting that.
Okay, anybody wish to prefer a motion?
Well, I don't think unless we're going to reject something, Michael's recommendation is that we not proceed. Do you need a motion to not proceed? I mean, if we do nothing, we're not proceeding.
We'd be authorizing
for the grant.
Right, but you need to give direction regards this letter?
Yes, that's what I was...
Correct. So that tomorrow when
one of the options before
drop the bomb on Tuolumne,
right, you're at least bringing something to the...
You'd authorize the director of probation to issue a letter to Tuolumne County indicating the county's interest in a long-term lease of 8 beds at the juvenile detention facility, juvenile hall, that would be constructed by Tuolumne County. Any final action would have to be pending the cost per night per bed. We don't want to. We like to at least know that. But that's basically what you're saying.
Thank you.
Go write a letter on these terms.
Then we're interested. If you want a letter that says we're of interest in discussing a commitment for 8 beds, and if you're interested in us having that discussion, let's sit down and talk about it. I'm for that, and I will make that motion.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That's a 5-0 vote. I guess good luck over there. We have a request for a 5-minute recess. We'll take that at this moment and come back at 25 to 11. Okay, back in session. We now turn our attention to item number 9 on the agenda. This is a code compliance case number 08-17 regarding Michael W. Pryor. Mr. Barr.
Good morning, Todd Barr with Code Compliance. This case is pretty simple. It was initiated on September 17th of 2007. Since that time, we've had absolutely no contact with the property owner. They've signed registered mail receipts, and we've received them back. We have proof of service, but they have failed to contact us.
Okay, is a representative or Mr. Pryor himself present today? All right, this comes from the otherwise beautiful District 5. Do you have any comments, Supervisor Thomas?
Only to, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I just have to ask a question, Todd. There is a statement in here about your Calaveras Code Compliance Unit is authorized to abate any remaining code violations upon expiration of appeals. Well, there's some, looks like some unsafe decks and stuff there. Would we actually go out and plank those or put plywood on them, or what does code abatement constitute in that particular?
In this particular case, we would just make the structure safe, which could include boarding up windows, doors, blocking off decks, things like that.
We would do that?
Yes, just make them safe.
Okay. All right.
There's also, there's part of the code in the state code that states that a structure that is left vacant for a period of 6 months or even after we boarded it up, that actually becomes a dangerous building, and at one point it could be torn down. If it continues to dilapidate and there is a immediate threat to health and safety. Did I say too much?
Well, no, it seems somewhat paradoxical because this is in an otherwise, like as Supervisor Walensky said, that this is in a beautiful part of District 5. It is very close to the reservoir and a very desirable place to have a home. I don't know why it's being neglected, but it is being neglected and it needs to be cleaned up. So unless there's any other discussion on this? No?
Apparently not.
Okay. I want to move that we uphold the findings and recommendations of the Administrative Hearing Board in the Code Compliance case number 08-17 regarding the violations of county code involving the property owned by Michael W. Pryor.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote.
Next was Poe. Is Poe on next? I'm sorry.
Yes. The item number 10 is Elizabeth Edwards, actually.
And that's the one that we'd like to continue to the second meeting in December?
Yes. Purpose of the delay is that I've held discussions with both complainant and Ms. Edwards. There is a scheduled cleanup of the property where the neighborhood will get together and help her out. She is infirm and unable to physically accomplish the work, but the neighborhood will help her do that. And presumably by the time it comes back to us, they'll be in compliance.
Move for continuance then.
Second.
There's a motion, a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0. We move to item 12. This is, item 11, which is the Timothy J. Poe property. Is Mr. Poe or a representative in the room? Okay.
Okay, this case has been going since 2003. The reason that it's gone so long is that there was some litigation involved in this. So we stepped back for a little while to let that litigation take its course. That's all done now. The structures The unpermitted structures are still on the property, and they've actually attempted to rent these out again or several times since we started working with him.
It's not my district.
Well, doggone it, I'm getting beat up again here.
It's a rough day for District 5.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that we uphold the findings and recommendations of the Administrative Hearing Board in Code Compliance Case Number 08-19 regarding violations of Calaveras County Code involving Timothy J. Poe. The property is located at 5936 Chuckwagon Drive in the community of Copperopolis.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote. Thank you, Mr. Barr.
Thanks, Todd. Excuse me?
We are now moving to item 13, extension of time for development. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I've skipped one again. This is a discussion and possible action regarding a resolution establishing a habitat conservation plan designated fund and approve a minute order for budget transfer. This will require a 4/5 vote, and it comes from the Community Development Agency.
Mr. Chairman, Robert Selman, Planning Director. This is simply an accounting procedure. We have received the grant. The grant requires us to isolate the funds. This would be similar to the same sort of accounting we use for our environmental contracts. It's set into a designated fund, and we just need to get it established. We will hopefully be getting additional funds, and if that happens, they would also be deposited into the same designated fund. So we would just ask your approval.
All right. Is there a motion on this?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote, thereby gaining its 4/5. Now we move to 13, and I understand from the clerk that this involves an ordinance, although that was not listed in the agenda. This is an extension of time for development agreement for Saddle Creek. This once again brings Director Selman to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the lack of clarity in the actual process here. The request is for an extension of time to an existing development agreement. Because that agreement was approved by an ordinance, the extension also needs to be by ordinance. The request is one that actually originally had a number of different components. We have resolved all of those prior components till we are down now only to the actual extension of time. The request is for a total of 10 years to the development agreement. Staff does not have any concerns. The Planning Commission has recommended, in fact, that you extend the period of time for up to a 10-year period. Staff has recommended in front of the Planning Commission that it be an extension of 2 5-year time limits. And in this case, particularly because of the general plan and its potential for change, I'm not anticipating any change over what's proposed, but I felt it was best to try to reserve whatever options might be possible for the board if they are so desirous. So the ordinance is written, and we did provide a clean copy to the clerk with the corrected dates on it, does approve a 10-year extension to the development agreement for Saddle Creek. It does it in terms of 2 5-year periods. The applicant would simply have to file a request with our office to go directly to the board to see if they would approve the second 5-year extension.
Would the board have discretion at that time as to whether to approve it or not?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what you're recommending is a 5-year extension.
It's a 5-year.
If the applicant wishes an additional extension, they will make that request, and that request will come to the board as an independent item.
Right. Certainly, we have no objection to the total of 10 years. We feel it should just be a bifurcated process there. Okay.
All right.
So if there's any questions?
Yes. One additional question. We do the development agreement because we want these developments to be done to mitigate impacts of development. When you're recommending a continuation of this or an extension of time for this, then it seems to me what you're saying is that there's been no development that impacts, that needs to be mitigated, that it hasn't already been mitigated, and that as development happens, if it should happen within the next 5-year period, they still have to do those things that will mitigate that development. Is
Absolutely.
that correct?
This is really a timing issue. The development, as you're all aware of Saddle Creek, it has been, I don't want to sound like a salesman here, but it has been one of our premier examples of how to do things well and correctly. I think everybody looks at the Saddle Creek development as being exactly what they have advertised. They have performed on all matters, and clearly we are most pleased with the direction and the accomplishments. I think everyone believed that there was time to get it done within the original time period, which I believe was 20 years. It's running a little bit longer. We can certainly recognize that, and especially with today's economy, it's eminently reasonable to grant the extensions.
Thank you.
My understanding is that a number of the mitigations that were anticipated for the full build-out were actually pre-accomplished or have already been completed, and so they're actually ahead of the game on the mitigation. It's the build-out.
It's the build-out side that's their problem that we need to try to accommodate, and staff and the commission certainly has recommended we do so. Excuse me, I would add there is one additional thing. Because this was originally recorded, in any motion we would ask that you also authorize the clerk to record the ordinance amendment. Okay.
Yes,
sorry.
that's as I was suggesting at the outset here. Okay, this comes to us from District 5, I believe. Supervisor Thomas, do you wish to comment?
Only to ask if the applicant or representatives from Castle and Cook have any comments.
Paul Stein from Castle and Cook, good morning. At the risk of overselling, I just wanted to make sure that the board did know that we have completed a major portion of all the development agreement obligations, inclusive of the Little John Road development, the wetland mitigation, the build-out of the Copperopolis Fire Department off of Copper Cove. But there is one outstanding development agreement item that we still need to complete, and that's the secondary entrance to Saddle Creek. That will be coming off of the new Parkway extension from Copper Cove Drive, so we will be presenting that to your board hopefully early in 2009. So basically the staff report is very clear. We're just looking for an extension of time up to 10 years in 2 5-year increments to allow us to continue our build out in an orderly fashion. If there are no further questions, unless Marita has something for me.
No, I just, what happens at the end of 10 years? If it's not...
We would hope to come back and complete the development, of Saddle Creek. We have entitled 1,650 units. Right now, we're about into it with 500 units. So we're hoping that the market does come back over the next 10 years, and we're able to develop accordingly. But
that's my question. At the end of 10 years.
10 years, yes.
Does the development agreement then ceases to exist?
Just like this one does, has a defined date of June 14th, 2009. We're now extending it by 5-year increments. So at that particular time, it would expire again. We would be asking again if we needed to for another extension.
So in 10 years, if it's not completed, then you'll be coming back for another. I thought the development agreement had a lifespan.
It has a lifespan that originally was 15 years. That's correct.
Mr. Selman?
Mr. Chair, just so we're clear, the development agreement goes predominantly to the entitlements necessary to create the parcels, the subdivisions themselves. Once those tract maps are recorded, the development agreement certainly is an internal process, but the zoning, the ultimate build out of those parcels is not necessarily part of our concern. All of our entitlements hopefully will be granted through the entitlements of the maps. We've done all of the zoning, so once that's done and it's in place, the development agreement can in essence go away. I mean, once it's just a construction project anymore, then it's an internal operation through the CC&Rs and so on, and the county does not need to have a development agreement once the development, that is the tentative maps and the zoning and the major road construction is complete. So in theory, the development agreement could be completed and there could still be ongoing construction for years, but that would just be under the zoning for the specific plan.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
His answer was much better than mine.
I think so.
Thank you for your support.
Thank
All right.
you.
Any other comments?
Any other comments from the members of the audience, staff, board members? Okay, at this point, we'll entertain a motion.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we approve the extension of time and allow the developer an additional 5 years with the option to apply for an additional 5 years to complete the obligations set forth in the development agreement. And that would include the reference to the recordation of the new ordinance as well.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on 5-0 vote. And we now turn our attention. District 5 is on a roll today. We're now talking about Copper Mill zoning amendment to add language governing sign height over pedestrian pathways.
Mr. Chairman, Robert Selman, Planning Director. This item is brought to you because of a problem we have discovered within the Copper Mill, as we originally called it, development in Copperopolis. The county has a zoning code created for that development that allows a mixed-use type of development as well as residential components strictly. The commercial portion of the code has a number of, basically, they're double calls. It says there's a provision that you can do certain things under the specific authorities of the Copper Mill zoning code, and where we do not address other features, then the county's general zoning codes apply. This is a particular case with signs relative to projecting signs, those that are over sidewalks and so on. In this case, the signs are allowed by the code, but the Copper Mill code did not specifically address sign heights. So our county code specifically requires 10 feet of clearance between the bottom of the sign and the walkways. For whatever reason, part of it was architectural. I think part of it may have been nobody really thought that particular piece of the question all the way through at the time we were discussing it. The specific exemption for a lower sign height was not included in the Copper Mill zoning code. So at this point, the only option appears to be to amend the codes. And there's, as the report indicates, there's two ways. You can either amend the county's zoning code countywide, or you can amend the Copper Mill zoning code so it would specifically address the signage strictly within the Copper Mill development. Of the two, staff clearly would recommend that you do only the Copper Mill because those are designed architecturally to fit into their particular development. The question then becomes, how do we do this? I have no authority to initiate. Staff does not have the authority to initiate a zone change. And dealing with Supervisor Thomas, that's why we ultimately got this to you, is to figure out how you want to proceed. There are two options available to you. Either the applicant can file a zone change petition, which is, it's going to cost $9,000 to file a zone change amendment. That's the current cost. To amend the code that applies to their project, or the county can initiate the zone change, and county staff will then take that and process it like every other code amendment and move it through the process. So those are sort of the range of options you have before you. It is a matter of procedure. We need to have two determinations, whether you think it is more appropriate to go with just the Copper Mill or whether you want to do it county-wide. And secondly, if the county wants to initiate the zone change itself. So that's the nature, very briefly, of the considerations, and I will stop talking.
Question, Bob, why doesn't the applicant just meet the 10-foot requirement?
Structurally, I believe because the overhangs are literally beneath overhangs, the overhanging signs are architecturally inside of a sidewalk that is under an overhang. And there's not enough vertical clearance to make the 10 feet plus.
The answer, you'd be 3 feet into the building.
Yeah, there's just not enough height of the covering.
Answers the question.
The sign would be
My own
3
feeling
feet
would be
above the roof.
I'm willing to grant the exemption, but I think the applicant should be the initiating party.
Okay, so
All right, why don't we hear from the supervisor whose this issue emanates from, and then we'll have a discussion as to whether we should do this, the advisability as to whether to do this specific to the location or countywide.
Okay. Seems like I've been talking a lot today, but I kind of like it. Anyway, I'm very vehemently opposed to having this be restricted to the copper mill project, because I would like to draw your attention to the fact that every sign in the town of Murphys is also out of compliance with this code. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that for the last 10 years we've been looking at the Sierra Conservancy's book on the prosperity, building for prosperity, that talks in page after page after page about the uniqueness of this area, how our purposes will be best suited by capitalizing on our heritage economy. Build things that look like they looked in the gold rush and the Civil War period. That this is a mantra that was repeated over and over and over again at the recently conducted Economic Development Conference. I think that it's really quite remarkable that I would have to initiate this change whenever, if you comply with the rules, you'd have to build buildings that look like they're designed and built in San Jose. That's clearly not what we want to accomplish here. So to have the staff suggest that they would prefer to just have it apply to this particular development, I'm incensed by that, because what are we doing here? Are we trying to build a fire under the economic opportunities in this county or not? And having one developer pay for it, when I think that as a board of supervisors we should be taking the responsibility upon our shoulders to lead here. And what does it take? I mean, all we have to do is just say that in the code that signs, specifically under signs, you can look at Amador County's code under signs, and they say that signs should be positioned and appropriate to the design theme of the building upon which they're attached or that they're associated with. It's just like that, and to specifically say that it has to be 10 feet above the ground, whenever stylistically these buildings, I mean, in 150 years ago, you didn't have 10 feet to the bottom of the overhanging roof structures. So if we're trying to, and I know I'm getting overly redundant here, but I'm trying to make the point that it's all part of a leadership role, I think, that I took on when I ran for board of supervisor, when I saw something that was out of whack, that I'm going to try to fix it. And I would really just implore you to recognize the reality that we have an economy here that is actually much more comparatively robust than other adjacent counties because of the uniqueness of this area. People have discovered us, and they will continue to discover us. It would be an embarrassment to me to approve this to apply to the copper mill only and have some entrepreneurial person buy a piece of property across the street from Copper Mill in Copperopolis and come down to, to get his plans approved and say, wait a minute, you got to raise those porches. He's trying to build a building that will emulate and imitate what's going on across the street, the very successful project at Coppertown Square, and run up against this a completely bizarre situation where he can't build something across the street because his signs are too low. I don't want that to happen. I would like to see the effort to comply with the things that are succeeding in this region, that we don't hamper them, that we don't build obstacles, and there's a kind of a theme in the way that we do business, is that we create impediments instead of opportunities. And I don't know, just please, let's do this on our nickel, change a sentence. Does that cost $3,000? I think not. So that would be my recommendation, and I'm anxious to hear others comment on it.
Okay, other supervisors?
Russ had a good argument about changing the county code, zoning code. I'm not for changing this county zoning code today. I don't want to piecemeal the changes. If this isn't a rush, then we can put it off and change it when we start changing other codes to meet the general plan. Given that we would like to move on this now, I would support doing it as proposed, leaving it under Copper Mill zoning code, even though I thought Russ had some good arguments for making it a county code. I don't know that we want to wait that long. I have no problem with the board initiating it, but like Supervisor Tryon, I do not want the general fund paying for this, and so I think the beneficiary, Castle and Cook, be required to cover the costs associated with the zoning code amendment. I'll take whatever the cost is that Mr. Salmon says and hope that the Castle and Cook would be willing to absorb that cost if they want this done.
I'd like to make a request of County Council at this point to advise us as to whether we would be able to amend the code today under this agenda item, which says specifically that we are talking about amending the Copper Mill.
Zoning.
Right, so it'd be direction. Would be
zoning has to go to the planning commission first.
All right, thank you.
A quick clarification, Bob. Why do we have 10 feet? I mean is that an arbitrary number, or is that based on
it is not totally arbitrary. We did a quick survey of a number of different communities, and heights of signs range anywhere. Typically, it's between 8 and 10 feet. And in all honesty, it's to create clearances beneath walkways so that, kids on their dad's shoulders don't walk into signs. Kids aren't always constantly climbing and beating on signs as they jump. Doing that kind of stuff. So it's trying to keep a safety margin. And clearly, if you're going to talk about signs that are close enough people can jump upon and hang, structurally, now it's going to get a little bit more curious than just something that's high enough that it would be reasonably safe to have to bear its own weight. So there are technical reasons why you would have standards for signs. I'm not trying to suggest there is a single exclusive answer as to what the correct quote-unquote height should be, and it's your jurisdiction's choice. So you could set it at 7.5, you could set it at 8, you could leave it at 10. It's your choice. Our only concern is that we, to the extent we can, we treat everybody under a uniform code.
What are, like Tuolumne and Amador, what do they do for sign height?
I have a list. I didn't bring it with me. I'm sorry. I've got a list of a number of different jurisdictions. I believe Tuolumne was at 10. I would not swear to that. I can't remember. It's not?
No.
Okay, I don't remember.
7'6".
Okay, whatever it is. So we have that listed. We can certainly look at it in this process and bring all that information forward to you.
Have you had any issues in other towns about sign height? Anything come in over the last couple of years?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
How is the...
These are signs that are basically attached to the buildings?
These are
standalone signs?
No, these are suspended signs. They are hung on the face of the building, and they project out across the sidewalk or the walkway.
Well, I support the variance for Saddle Creek as long as they change their sign ordinance to include neon signs so they can be more like Murphy's that they were designed after.
Tacky triangle.
Because Russ is so interested in the historical aspects of the county from the gold rush.
Okay, I'm going to intervene as chair on this and suggest that that's slightly on another topic, but let's continue to comment on this.
I think we were advised a couple of weeks ago that neon is already allowed in the code, so we won't need to modify.
That's out of order too.
Anyway, I think there's room for agreement, even though the statements have all been a little different here, at least I think so. It's pretty obvious to anybody that hasn't been in a coma for the last month that there's some problems with signs in this county. Started off with the billboards. Remember the billboards? Yeah. And then the marathon issue of the signs in Murphy's, and now this sign. So I'm not that emotional about it yet. I'm not incensed, at least not yet, or embarrassed. But I do think that the county's sign ordinance needs some scrutiny. And I would support taking a look at that for possible modification of that entire ordinance. In the meantime, if I understand correctly, for the purposes of the copper mill, they would like to proceed with their development down there and get some advertising out for their facilities. So at this point, I would like to put that portion on the fast track and support the idea of this modification for the copper mill at this time, thinking that that's going to be done in a little more timely fashion than modifying the entire county sign ordinance. I do agree with both Rita and Tom about it is a minimal cost, but nevertheless, I don't think I want to take any money out of the general fund that we don't have to. So I think that cost should be borne by the applicant. So suffice it to say that I am very much in support of granting this 7.5 feet, is it? Is that what is needed? 7.5 feet minimum. Yeah, granting that, and to be done as soon as possible, funded by the applicant. But I also would be very interested and support very much taking a good long look at our sign ordinance.
That will be a controversy.
Well, why don't we divide these considerations and take them one at a time? Are there any comments from the public on this? Yes.
Paul Stein again, Castle and Cook. I guess I'm just looking for a little bit of a clarification on what the applicant's portion of the fee would be. I've seen in the staff report it estimates $2,000 to $3,000, and then I think I heard from Mr. Salmon $9,000. And we're willing to pay a reasonable fee and initiate it as an applicant request. We certainly stand behind that. The language is very clear. We support the language. And we understand, as you do, that at one point this language was introduced to be a part of the Copper Mill zoning code, was struck at that time by staff as being outside the purview of their jurisdiction, and now found out that, when we actually start hanging signs, we're now non-compliant, we get notice of corrections, and this is the complication. So we would very much like to straighten that out, and as long as we are going to be talking about a codification of this, we'd also like to probably add that we need to change the Copper Mill name to Coppertown Square, which is its current designation. So we would support that as well. But if staff could kind of give us some kind of indication on what the actual fee would be, that would be very helpful. Other than that, we support the request. We support staff's position and your support.
Okay, can staff illuminate us on the specific of the fee? With some consideration for the history of its...
This is going to get a little curious, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, it is.
The fees, the only fees I have are the adopted fees. So basically, I'm going to turn to the county council and say, is it possible that if the board were to, at this point, all I can say is write a gentleman's agreement with the applicants that if the county initiated the zone change today, the applicants would agree to reimburse the county for our actual costs, and we would just track our time in preparing the language, the posting for the Planning Commission, and that sort of stuff. So I would anticipate the range is going to be relatively small, because if you're only talking a zone change within the copper mill project, we should have a very small controversial issue, as opposed to going countywide. If the board can find some way to do that, we'll certainly.
Well, what's the resolution say? I mean, we have a fees by resolution.
Well, there is no fee other than for a zone change, and we
So what's the zone change?
Zone change is $9,140, I think, for any change to the code, whether it's zoning code or text amendment. So that's what the adopted fee schedule is.
Where did this $2,000 to $3,000 come from?
That was an estimate of staff of what we figured it would actually take for us to do this particular change strictly within this development.
It has to be a zone change to make
It's a code change, yes. Yeah.
Code change,
It's
that's
a
the
code
same as a zone change?
It's an ordinance,
Okay.
it's a code
Well,
change.
I guess my question of county council is, is there a variance to that? Can you charge one person $9,000 for a code change and another $1,000?
Well, I think not today. This is not on the agenda. The agenda is just for direction as to whether you want this to go to the Planning Commission or not.
Okay.
When it comes back to the board, assuming the Planning Commission it passes back to the board, I think that the board can adjust the fee based on the circumstances at the time, but not today.
Well, I would track your time and then see what the board does with it when you come back.
We'll just do the accounting, and if your board seeks reimbursement, we'll just treat it that way. Okay?
Okay.
Assuming there is in fact a motion to do that.
No, but they have to agree to it. I don't want this, they have to agree to it. I mean, Mr. Stein said, well, 9,000 he might not, but 3,000 he might, and then.
We would stipulate, Supervisor Galloway, that suggestion by staff to track their costs and have a direct reimbursement with this board.
Provided it meets muster with county council's interpretation.
Yes.
All right. I'd like, if possible, to ask again if there's any further public comment before we bring this back for decision. Okay, there being none?
Yes, there is one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a brief comment. My name is Robin Peters. I'm actually here for another matter, but, excuse me, the discussion of sign height. I sit on a planning commission in Sutter Creek. Sutter Creek has rows and rows of overhanging balconies, and almost every sign in the downtown area is suspended from those overhanging balconies. The Planning Commission in Sutter Creek administers the sign ordinance. So every sign that is erected in Sutter Creek, at least in theory, is subject to permitting by the Planning Commission. Our height limit, or clearance, I should say, from sidewalk to bottom of sign is 8 feet, and it's been that way since the mid to early 90s, and we've never had an issue with a sign height of 8 feet. So do kids jump up and tap them? Sure. Do they swing once in a while when a little kid hits the head on it as they're walking by on dad's shoulders? Yeah, it happens. But in all the years I've been on the Planning Commission, I can't recall that there's ever been an issue with that height. I think anything higher than that or anything greater than 8 feet would cause some pretty significant problems with the design of signage, and I'm not sure the signage would be effective if it were much higher than that. So we're pretty satisfied with 8 feet, just as a matter of perspective.
Thank you. Salvador, Sutter Creek. Okay, I would like to divide this into two considerations. There's one more.
Councilman Cook said they'd like to change the name to Coppertown Square. Is part of that wrap, Bob, is that an issue?
Yes, it is. For us, in our ordinances only, it is not relative to their development. The reason we keep referring to Copper Mill is because that was the name that the applicant, or the file name was Copper Mill when it was adopted. The ordinance is called the Copper Mill Ordinance, and everything tracks that way. So we don't care what people call the development per se, but for purposes of ordinance administration, it is helpful to have continuity. I mean, it's a nightmare when all of a sudden, we went through this, and in fact, if you will remember, Saddle Creek is actually, rats, I just lost it, Country Club, Calaveras, and as names change, trying to find files and keep track is really impossible. We don't care what the people call it. We have that with subdivisions all the time. That's their choice, but for purposes of our ordinance tracking, it's really helpful to keep that portion of it. The rest of it's theirs. This does not control how they name their project in the slightest.
Okay, Supervisor Thomas.
Before you try to segregate the issues here, I'd just like to throw out a hypothetical discussion here. We have a future, or later in the agenda, we're going to be talking about a policy that we adopted on November 27, 2007. Now, that was done in one day. Now, just for the sake of discussion, what would be the harm in this board adopting a policy today that we recognize the wisdom of having signs that are less than 10 feet tall? It doesn't require that we change the ordinance today. We establish a policy. And it avoids the fees. It allows us to process this very much needed, very intelligent response to on the everyday occurrences. To do otherwise strikes me as being a little bizarre. But why can't we just put this in abeyance? I mean, well, why do we have to? There are things that are on the fast track around here that take 2 years or more to do. So why is it that there's this urgency to get them to agree to pay $3,000 or $2,000 or $9,000 or today? We need to change this. Does anybody here disagree that this needs to be changed? So in view of that, why don't we just poll the board and say, do you think that this is a policy that we would like to see, that the signs go to 7.5 or 8 feet tall, and just let it ride? Why do we need this militant attitude about going down to Copper Town Square and take your signs down because they don't comply with the current code? If we adopt a policy that establishes our desire to change it, why does it have to be more difficult than that?
That's a good question, but I have, as chair, some concerns about the integrity of the posted agenda item, which deals with this one thing. I would like to bifurcate the consideration, but get to the point that you're raising, which is what's the wish of the board in instructing staff to proceed on the question of the overall code. If you wish, you could, in the alternate, make a motion and see how that would go.
Mr. Chairman, if I could address the issue for just a moment.
Yes, of course.
Typically, when staff sees that the board's intent is to amend a code, and we have a code, I don't want to say violation issue, but a question of compliance with the code as it exists, what we have worked out with developers, and I say it developers plural because it's more than once, we have basically come to an agreement with developers that, based upon a code being changed, so that process has actually begun, we will basically toll the enforcement of the code as it exists, with the agreement that should the code not change, the developer would bring their project into compliance with code as it existed. So if the developer wanted to, in fact, have a few signs that were less than the 10 feet, we would not object to that, with the understanding that if the code does not change, they have to be removed. I mean, the code is the code, and we're certainly, obviously if there's an intention of the board to move that distance otherwise, we're certainly not trying to hold anyone's feet to the fire to the extent that they can't do anything. But you have to recognize that at some point, I've got employees who are going to have to sign off permits, and they need to follow their codes. So this is something we can do to work through the process. We've done it before. We'll do it again as long as you tell us it's okay, or at least don't tell us not to do it. So, that's how we would approach this particular problem at this time. But it's, again, premised on an actual direction to change the codes.
All right, well, we'll see where we stand on that momentarily. Is there a motion?
Okay, just one moment, please. I don't think that there's anything cast in stone here that the motion has to be exactly like it's on this paper here. So my motion, Mr. Chairman, would be essentially to repeat what Mr. Selman just said, is that as today's action would initiate a countywide zone change to allow signs to change the height requirements on signs, and we would initiate what did you call it, a tolling? You would toll the existing code to not create a violation?
I would suggest that does not have to be part of your motion. Staff will do that part of the agreement with the developer.
I would think that would be a very difficult problem for enforcement, for predictability, for someone reading the code online from some part of the other part of the country. I think it really creates a great deal of uncertainty, and I would recommend that you not do that.
Do you find it within the scope of the agenda item before us?
The agenda item's Copper Mill zoning code.
Yeah, I think that has a certain degree of flexibility, but a pronouncement of countywide policy, it really doesn't give the public notice to comment on the proposed change. So I would recommend against it.
So there is an alternate listed here at 2, is that we could vote, or we could move to amend Chapter 1772 to reduce the applicable signage height from 10 feet to 7 foot 6 inches. There's an editorial comment that says that this alternate is not recommended at this time, but that's exactly what I want to do. So that's my motion, to amend 1772 to reduce the applicable sign height from 10 feet to 7 foot 6 inches.
We have a motion. Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second it just to get to the discussion here.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Again, I'm not sure I'm hearing in the specificity necessary. I'm going to ask counsel again. We have a document that accompanied the board packet that does cover the scope that Supervisor Thomas is raising, and we have a public document in the agenda that is specific to Copper Mill. How do we reconcile that for the purposes of allowing action in this setting?
I need clarification on the motion. If the motion is to change the zoning code today, I don't think that's possible.
No, I want to
if the motion
initiate.
is to direct the planning commission.
Yes.
Then I think that's fine. Sure. Direct staff to take it back to planning commission with the recommendation from the board. I think that's fine, and it's covered by all the documents, if the board wants to do it.
All right, and the tolling that you were suggesting would, and the mechanism described by Mr. Selman would apply to the Copper Mill site and under your motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the motion.
What you're now saying.
Okay.
Can I suggest
Supervisor Thomas is trying to get an overarching policy and an implementation of a countywide zoning code and get direction from the board toward that end. In the interim, the way the Copper Mill situation would be handled under Supervisor Thomas's motion would be as Director Selman described in the way that the department interprets such moments.
Yeah, there's nothing specific in my motion that directs them to do that. Director Selman said that in previous instances when the department recognizes the wishes and desires of the board, that they do what they need to do. And I would expect that would apply in this case as well. But, you know,
So I take it the board is not suspending the enforcement of the law. That'll be left, how this is handled is left to the discretion of the department. But the board is not somehow suspending the enforcement of that provision.
This is getting way too convoluted.
It really is. You know, part of the problems that we have, one of the most hated words in the English language when it comes to dealing with planning issues is interpretation. I hear it every day, and the interpretation depends on the interpreter, of course. For my money, what I would like to see is for the Coppertown Square to get their signs that they need approved. And that's the issue that's on the agenda. But I would also like to have staff take a look at the zoning code to see if we want to expand that, change this, put something in writing that people can come to, as was suggested by the county council, somebody from out of the area can read our codes and see exactly what it is that is required of them without having to design and even build their facility and wait for an interpretation of whether their signs are going to be fine. So
I believe that was the aforementioned bifurcation of the issues that was suggested
But
earlier.
the issue on the agenda is to allow the Coppertown Square to have the signs that they need, and I am very much in favor of that. I'm also in favor of what Supervisor Thomas is suggesting about taking a look at this entire county with regard to our sign requirements, and I just think it needs a little more discussion than we're going to do in the next few minutes here.
All right, so what we have is two approaches to the same ends. I have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, we'll vote on that, and then depending on the outcome, proceed to the second consideration if that's the wish of the board. So those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay, the motion fails. Is there another motion that would accomplish the items raised in Bill's last comment?
Well, Bill will make that motion.
I was
How's
hoping
that?
so, yes.
Moving right along.
All right.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
He hasn't made it yet.
Yes, I did. I'm just not sure I can remember what I said.
He's diddling himself.
Yes, I move to approve the recommendation as put forth on the agenda so that the zoning code for the Coppertown Square is going to allow them to have their sign.
Okay, that's one motion, and we'll get to another one after that.
Okay, now you
So
need
there's a motion and a
to
second.
include in that the recommendation of staff that was made at the
No, Tom, he doesn't.
No, we are bifurcating the issues. There's a single motion on the issue that is agendized under item 14.
Just second.
That was just made. Is there a second?
Just put, we'll
Second.
put the other lid.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes on a 5-0 vote. Now, is there another motion directing staff on the question of approaching the zoning code regarding sign height and issuing recommendations?
If we're going to look at the sign code, then look at the sign code in its entirety. Don't piecemeal
Exactly.
the looking at
That
it.
would be the motion.
All right, we see.
And that's
that's a lot
direction.
different than just looking at sign height over
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yes, but we've had so much discussion here in the last couple of months over various types of
You're going to open up
signs.
the sign,
Yes.
the whole sign code. We're going to,
Yes.
that will be a very long discussion.
Yes.
I'm personally already have sign fatigue, but I guess we'll...
Well, it's just like there's more on the horizon. We've discussed signs.
Okay, open it up. Bring it back.
All right, so is there a motion to that effect?
Yes, I think I made that.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Bob, you understand what the direction is? All right. Those in-
Wait, I want to, Mr. Selman, what do you understand the direction?
The county sign code will be looked at comprehensively and brought back through the Planning Commission and to your board for consideration of amendments.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Before you leave, the previous motion, you had asked for a clarification on the amending the ordinance, or excuse me, the zone code. Did that get in it or not?
I'm fine with your prior motion. I'm good. We'll take care of it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and this is for the comprehensive review, as Supervisor Callaway had previously suggested. And it's giving direction to staff to make a comprehensive review and recommendation to the board on revisions to our sign code, not just the height, but all matters pertaining to it. Is there further discussion? Any public comment, dare I ask? All right. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing no noes, it passes on a 5-0 vote. We now move to item number 15.
No. It's the paying for the work. We need to...
And that meter's running right now.
Huh?
That's right.
The meter's running, that's fine.
I believe that was inherent in the separate too.
No, it wasn't. Well,
all right, well, let's...
All I'm saying is I'm voting no unless the applicant or Copper Mill pays for it.
We already said we would support a reasonable fee based on staff's compiling all of their time spent, and we would work out an agreement on that.
And that would come back to the board at that time. That's my understanding of it.
So county council says you have to charge everybody the same for a code change, then you're going to get charged the same for a code change.
Right, and those were implied, and we should simply say that was part of the original motion. I would ask the maker of the motion and the second to confirm that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so done. We now move, I think,
to 15.
To item 15. Discussion possible action requesting board provide clarification of the applicability of the approved board policy dated November 27, 2007 to the range of projects as identified. Director Selman, again.
Mr. Chairman, this is... I need to be careful how I describe this to you so we can keep our focus as staff intends it. Under our codes, staff cannot refuse to receive an application that is appropriately filed. Your board adopted a policy as an interim measure while the general plan is being amended that stated you would not want to have developments that were more than one parcel being created if they were less than 40 acres, or projects that are not on public sewer and water. Based upon...
With one exception being a single divide for family.
Yeah, that was included. So based upon that direction, we've been working with a number of clients through almost a year now. And in most cases, applicants have, in reading that code, felt that they understood what it meant and that they understood staff would be recommending denial of a project. And it's very expensive and time-consuming to go through a process that the only result is going to be denial if the board, in fact, upholds its own policy. We do have a couple of applications that have been filed that issue still remains. There's one, I gave you two examples. I think there's yet another one or two we may wish to come back for further clarification because of some different issues. We'll get to those later. The real question, and we're talking at this point of residential development, is whether or not your board policy of calling for 40s in fact means 40s. We have a case before you that is 4 5s and a remainder. We have another case that is a fair number of 5-acre parcels. Now, if I could make a clarification, with the example I gave you, the proponents of the, I think it's, let me get the right name on the subdivision. What's your subdivision called?
Spring Valley.
Spring Valley Estates. They are asking for a different determination relative to the question of the timeliness of filing, which I think is somewhat of a variation on the questions we have before you. So if we could set that aside for a moment and talk only in terms of an application for numerous 5-acre parcels that are on private well and septic tank and would seem to be just facially contrary to the simple language of your policy. We provided that for you. We are not asking you to judge any of these projects in any way on its merits. There are some very real technical problems that need to be addressed that the normal review process and the environmental review process would have to deal with. There are other general plan issues, but staff would prefer not to, just like today's earlier project, the refund for Mr. Sloan. We would rather not go through that entire long, expensive process if the end result is, by the time we get to the board, your board says, no, 40 meant 40, and this doesn't qualify. So we are asking only for a clarification or at least an affirmation that those specific levels of division are in fact all that you are going to consider as being in conformance with the general plan during this interim period. Now, in some ways, in all honesty, this may be a moot question because based on that chart behind you, we may actually have a draft general plan before the Planning Commission and Board before these projects actually come forward, and then we have a whole different question of law. But nonetheless, we still need to address the clients who have filed these. I really don't want to go through a process and come out only with a recommendation for denial when I know that's what the board has already directed us to do. So that is our discussion if you have questions, and apparently the chair does.
Well, the chair is a bit astonished that, and it's a sad commentary, I suppose, on our consistency or lack of. If you have to come to us and ask whether 40 is 40 or whether we meant that when we said it, it is a concern of mine. But we'll see whether your question is.
Let me assure you, there is no question in staff's mind what is allowed under that interim policy. And we have tried to advise our clients of that. If they choose to file the application, I guess the answer may very well be, okay, they've paid their money, they take their chances. At this point, if your board affirms that 40 means 40, I would give these clients an opportunity to withdraw these applications. We'd refund, most of their money and not move forward. Otherwise, we'll take their money. We will move forward to the Planning Commission with a recommendation for denial as being specifically contrary to your policy. So I don't want to waste my clients' time and money. I don't want to waste my staff's time and on things that basically you've already given us very firm direction. So sometimes I guess the saying is you have to stare into the eyes of the jury. But we do have people who would still like to discuss this. Now, again, in fairness, the one question that is a little different we have on that large subdivision, the question of the timing and whether it should have been considered.
All right. I'd certainly like to consider these two different discussions. So for the purposes of this...
If we could break that out, that would be fine.
All right. So which would you like to consider first?
If we get just to the issue of, for lack of a better way of saying, does 40 mean 40, and get that behind us, then we can determine whether a particular application should be considered received.
Fair enough. That's how we will proceed. Are there comments from the public?
Good morning. My name is Rosemary Wilson. I live in McCullamy Hill. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but especially Steve Walensky had asked before on one of the previous topics whether there was any questions from or comments from the public. And I know that something about the history of the planning and building and zoning and general plan conflicts having gone along for a long time, but I can't help but feel that a number of decisions and things that are brought before the board or issues that boil down to planning, one answer being in conflict to another answer, stem from our director of planning's comment that if he and his staff knew that these Board of Supervisors were going to or had the intention of doing something to change a procedure, then they would apparently consider the procedure for all intents and purposes to have been changed, and therefore, follow the perception of what the supervisors intend to do before it's actually been put in code and made an approved procedure or policy, then it's no wonder that you seem to be in the position that you're in of always needing to refer back to what the director of planning remembers historically, and not, and we shouldn't be having a conversation, should we? Is 40 really 40? It just seems that the staff should not be making up or interpreting the will of the supervisors or the planning commission without the decisions having been finalized. I say that having come from some years in quality control and approving raw materials or some such based on specifications that were going to be changed but haven't been changed, you can get into big trouble. Well, that's just from not being a builder or a developer. I just have to say that really struck me as odd and improper, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Other comments?
Hi, Carl Stoughton. I'd like this held over till after January 6th. This is going to have implications that are going to affect the new sitting board. So if you could, this doesn't affect me any. My project's already through, as you know. But it'd be nice.
Thank you. Other comments?
I'm not back on garbage. I know this isn't to discuss a specific project, but Public Works would like to just weigh in and tell you that oftentimes when you look at projects that lack water and sewer, that also coincides with lack of adequate roads. And one of the two examples in your report, the Mosby project on Pool Station Road, is on a segment that's service level D. And as the general plan requires, there are certain changes that would have to be made to the road to bring it up to service level C. And we don't know what the right-of-way is. We prepared a memo yesterday on this. But if there isn't adequate right-of-way out there, that project would not be able to move forward until there was. And if the applicant couldn't get it, the Public Works Department would be forced to implement the eminent domain process.
You have to speak up, Michael. Please speak up.
The applicant is required to get the right-of-way for the project if there isn't adequate right-of-way on Pool Station Road. If the applicant is unsuccessful in that process with the property owner, then it comes back to us to get the right-of-way through eminent domain or whatever process we use. We're just weighing in as an example. We've prepared a memo. We'll just leave it with the board clerk. We just want to let you know that this is something that comes up routinely with isolated developments. We don't want to distract you from just this general thing. We just wanted to weigh in with that so you are aware of that.
All right, thank you. I do want to reiterate, however, that this is not a subject that's before us. We're not reviewing the merits of these applications. We have two things that we're reviewing. Number one is the question of the applicability of our November 2007 resolution, and secondly, if it does apply to these projects, were the projects, what time did they come in, and what's our consideration in relation to that? So the road stuff, while if they did come up for consideration, would certainly come into play, it is not yet before us today. Supervisor Tryon, did you have a question?
Maybe when we do the next issue.
Okay.
It's the next issue question, not the
All right.
policy question.
Hopefully you'll still be available, Mike, for further questioning at the second issue. Yes.
Robin Peters, again, I'm with Cal State Engineering. I represent one of the two examples, the Spring Valley Estates project that's on as part of your agenda packet tonight. And my office also represents several other projects that have become subject to resolution, the resolution from November 2007 that we're talking about today. And I didn't come today prepared to discuss the merits of the resolution. I don't know that it's as ambiguous as all that. The language is subject certainly to some interpretation just because of the way it was set up, but my primary focus today is really to discuss the timing of applications and how the resolution and the intent of the resolution applies to the application submittal timing. And I'll give you an example. Actually, I can give you a couple of examples. But in particular, the Spring Valley Estates project that's part of your packet today. The property purchasers secured title to the property in early 07, or certainly began the negotiating process early in 07, took title somewhere in the middle of 07, and immediately got us going on the development of the property. One of the first things we do on a project of this size is meet with the planning department, the community development agency, and talk with the folks at the planning department about what is going to be required for an application to be complete. In this case, we were directed to do biological evaluations, cultural resources evaluations, a traffic study. We had aerial mapping done so that we could design the project properly. And there were other studies as well, an oak woodland evaluation, and on and on. Those studies were contracted as soon as we were hired. This is in mid-07, early fall of 07, and we began to get these consultants going to get these studies done. Now, some of these studies take quite a while. Several of them, the biological evaluation, the cultural resources evaluations, those are pretty complicated and they take a great deal of time. In particular, biological evaluations sometimes have to be done at certain times of the year because of the way plants flower and that sort of thing. In any case, these studies were well underway when the November 27, 07 policies were adopted. It's my understanding, after extensive discussions with the planning department, that the way the resolution is interpreted is that if a project had been, an application, I should say, had been submitted for a project before the implementation date of that resolution, November 27, then the policies don't apply. Anything submitted after November 27 is subject to the policies. A very strict date, and the policy, the resolution was discussed and adopted all in one day. Honestly, we didn't even know it was coming. There's very little warning, certainly no time to wrap up projects and get them submitted to beat the deadline. My argument, or my recommendation today before the board is that as a discussion of fairness and equity, there should be a look-back period, and I won't pretend to know exactly what that period should be, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, I don't know. But there should be, or should have been, consideration at the time for a look-back period to allow applicants that had been acting in good faith based on recommendations and discussions and meetings with the county planning staff, had been working on these projects and spending money to do all the right things, get these studies in place. There should be an opportunity for those folks to have wrapped up their projects and get them submitted without being subject to that strict deadline of November 27. And that really is the crux of my argument. And the letter I wrote that initiated this process, I think, is in your packet, and it really boils down to a request that the board not change that resolution, not change that policy, but provide guidance for planning staff to interpret that deadline of November 27 not so strictly, and allow some fair look-back period to allow applicants like mine and several others that I know have been trapped by this thing to move forward without being subject to those policies. I don't know how many projects we're talking about. In my office, of 18 or 20 projects, I think we have 3 that fall into this category that had been actively working and busily paying consultants to get these studies in order when the November 27 policy fell on us and pulled the rug out from under us. I think we have 3. If you could extrapolate that across the other active engineers and surveyors in the area, there might be a total of 10. I don't know. I can only guess at that, but I really don't think there are very many. And I would observe that the policies, the November 27 resolution, the policies embodied in that resolution, I would argue were intended to present an overarching goal for the county to prevent or discourage future applicants from becoming involved in properties that didn't meet those policies. I would ask the board to recognize and acknowledge that there were folks that had already started the process and were diligently working on an application so that when they brought the application, it was complete when the policy was put into effect. And there should be some consideration for allowing those poor folks to finish up what they were doing without being subject to the policies. Now, everybody knows that every project that comes before the county is subject to the discretionary review process after environmental review. The project has to argue and stand on its merits in the end. We know that. We're asking for an opportunity to present our projects and enter a discussion on the merits. At this point, planning staff has told us because of the policy and the application date that we can't even do that, and we're asking for an opportunity to do that. I would ask the board to establish, interpret their action in such a way that there really was intended to be some reasonable look-back period to allow those in the process to wrap up their applications and get them submitted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Sparks, and I'm one of those projects caught in the middle. And you have the 2 items, the applicability of your directive on November 27th. I was curious, my project is going to be all industrial, and I understand that the 40-acre minimum was kind of designed to stop urban sprawl and stop, a mobile home dotting, every 5 acres around the area, and keep it more condensed so that you have subdivisions with the proper sewer coming out of there. Now, I have a project that's just industrial only, so I wanted, clarification, discussion of is industrial indeed subject to the 40-acre minimum, or is, because there's less impact, there's less people, it's a whole different can of worms compared to residential. And first off, and then also to back up what Robin said on the second item, we had spent probably, 50, 60,000, but done all the biological, the aerials, and all the studies, and we're waiting for one study from a cultural person to come in so we can then put the package in with, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, like they asked us to. And then this directive came down, and because, one, study hadn't been filed, we got caught in the middle. And now we've been waiting a year to really find out if we can split this, split it into 5-acre parcels. And industrial projects are, I would think that's what you would want to push and grow, and because of the tax base that they bring in. And I'm just curious, is there anything about industrial versus residential in the resolution on November 27th? Nothing, it's just a general overall? Then I would ask that that would be a discussion that we bring up, whether that should be broken out and then maybe exempted from this policy. And then take into consideration what Robin had said about timing and the good faith efforts of everybody trying to bring business to the area. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
No, he's talking about. My name is Sam Mosby. I'm here on behalf of Crazy Horse, which is the same situation that the gentleman spoke before me and the one before him. He couldn't have said it better, what I have to say. He said everything I need to say. In the same loop, he did his due diligence as we felt we did, and none of us were aware that this happened. And we spent thousands and thousands of dollars, and we're just kind of stuck at your mercy here. I would hope that everybody can see what he is saying, that there's got to be some look-back period here. We didn't try to deceive anybody or sneak anything by anybody. We're trying to do what the board asked. And as the gentleman back there said, all these studies take time, and if you apply for a split too soon and it's not complete, they won't accept it. So we tried to do our due diligence and get everything we need: road access, all the biological studies, and like you said, there's a guy out there in the middle of the night with a tape recorder trying to find a red-legged frog. So all these things
I didn't know you could find them with tape recorders. That's a new method, right?
Well, because they have a particular sound.
That's the best way to look for them, as far as I'm concerned.
Anyway, this is where we are, and I can't tell you how we got here exactly, but I don't know if you got a copy of our letter. I hope you all did and read it. It is a 4-parcel split and a remainder on Full Station Road. And the gentleman spoke earlier about the road, the level of service on the road. It is a C in most places. It's a D in about 2.2 miles of it, which we know that, and we've already been through that. We've been through Public Works and spoken with the people at hand. That's why we only asked for 4 parcels and a remainder, because parts of it is a D. So that answers his question or his concern, I believe. The only thing I would ask is that you consider what we're doing and what we've spent and what we're going through. We're trying to create a few jobs, build some nice homes, and live in this area. I believe we're going to be an asset to this area. That's all it is. I don't know how this happened. I'm not here to throw rocks. I have no axe to grind with anybody. I'm not political. I don't want to argue, blame, or judge anybody. It is what it is. What can we do now?
Thank you.
Hi, Colleen Platt from MyValleySprings.com. This is not about the timing.
This is about to reaffirm the intent of the resolution. Just wanted to speak to that. The policy language that the board did adopt back November 2007 stated the general plan update, in particular the land use element, should include goals, policies, and implementation measures regarding criteria for future development that limits the use of groundwater and on-site septic systems to serve that development, and should instead encourage high-density development served by public water and public sewer with preservation of on-site open space and habitat as later stated in criteria number 2. We support this intent of the resolution. The timing are different issues that you'll discuss. A recent article in the Enterprise reported building more homes closer together within easy walking distance of stores and services may be the best way to deal with dwindling water supplies. This was one of the observations from the Calaveras Water and Land Use Today and Tomorrow workshop recently held in Murphy's. Speakers painted an urgent need to rethink development policies and planning. Patricia Hickson of the Sierra Nevada Alliance said that the current model with homes on 1 to 5 acres located far from services is heavily impacting supplies and water quality. My Valley Springs believes that current board policy on discretionary development represents progress towards rethinking of these proposals, and because it recommends limiting divisions of land under 40 acres to those supplied by public sewer and water. The county is in the middle of revising the general plan and community plans and is in the middle of determining where future growth should occur, where it should not occur, and what land use and growth policies will be under the new general plan. Major development at this time could conflict with general plan and community plan updates and policies. We support high-density residential development served by public water and sewer with preservation of on-site open space, oaks, and wildlife habitat located in and adjacent to community centers. This will forestall the loss of agricultural lands, species habitat, and open space. We support the intent of policy resolution number 07242 regarding development because we believe it is in the best interest of our community and our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
My name's Chris Williams. I'm an attorney in San Andreas, and I just have some general observations about this. In case anybody noticed, development in this county is pretty dead, pretty effectively dead, and developers have told me they're not even going to try over here anymore. They're going to go over to Amador and other places. But I think what you have here, you all have you're in the process of implementing some monumental changes. The general plan amendment and these type of things. And there's going to be some bumps in the road. There are going to be these kind of situations that kind of fall between the cracks and they get missed. But I think the words that I would keep in mind are fairness and competence, and not necessarily what you think is consistency. Both of these examples that were brought to you by Bob Selman involved cases where people were well on their way. They had done their due diligence. They had bought their property after looking at the zoning. And by the way, you're talking about a policy that was enacted at the end of last year, but the general plan has not changed. The zoning hasn't changed. It's the same that it was when these people started their projects, and they've started forward. And I think in Mr. Mosby's case, he spent about $250,000 doing studies. And he went to Public Works first because of this road issue about class level of service and all. And he was told, oh yeah, you can split into 410s and a remainder. He proceeded that way. He brought power to the project. He had a well dug. He did all the basic road work. Just needs to pave it now. And then he files his tentative map, and that's the first time. He started the process in February 2007. He filed his tentative map in June, and that is the first time that anybody said anything to him about the board policy. Now, whose fault is that? I don't know. I mean, I think it's draconian to lay it on the applicant. I mean, if you've been in the approval process for permits for a year, and now this comes up and you're saying, well, Bob Selman is saying, I think 40 is probably 40 and that's what it should be. And what about the equity in this, the fairness in this? Why are people in one department telling an applicant he can go ahead and everything's swell? I mean, are they ignorant of what's going on in another department? Or is it not their responsibility? I mean, I don't know, but I'm just appealing to you for simple fairness for these people that are caught in this big change that you're going through. And I know you're looking for better planning and more density and cluster, and I personally agree with that. But there's still these other projects that are good. They can be, like in Sam Mosby's case, he can put in a self-contained package, water treatment facility, and he can do whatever needs to do to ensure security of water supply. But it's too much to say, oh, well, we're really not talking about the merits of your project now. You are. If you're talking about enforcing that 40-acre minimum, you're essentially killing the project that he thought he had applied for. And so in summary, I would just ask that you be merciful and understand that some mistakes have happened in the processing or in the communication or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I asked staff 3 times for notice of this agenda item. I never got it until I called last week on the 13th and was told it was coming up. And then was told, well, as just mere courtesy to you. Well, I mean, these people are directly affected by it, and I don't think either one of them knew it was on the agenda until I called on November 13th. That's not right. So, just, I think Carl's suggestion was a good one. It's a big issue, and maybe it should be put over to the next board, but I would just ask that you be fair in applying your policy. Thank you.
My name is Elias Pappas. I'm represented by Robert Peters, Cal State engineer. I have a letter to you here, the Board of Supervisors, but before I start on that, I want to tell you something. I've been running a furniture store, and I've owned a furniture store for over 21 years. When I tell my customers they'll get a furniture in 2 months, they'll get it in 2 months. The customer will call me and tell me, where is my sofa? I tell them it's coming in 2 months. If it takes 4 months, what happens? Who is at fault? Myself, right? As a retailer. The November 2007 resolution 07242 on page 4 states, this policy shall not be binding with respect to the approval of any specific developments, application, and the county will continue to consider proposed projects on the merits as presented. We spent over $2 million to purchase the property. We spent in excess of $120,000 to do all the studies. We were instructed by the county staff to do so. We started this early 2007. We closed escrow on June 8th, 2007. June 13th, we hired Robin Peters, Cal State engineer. We have an application with Mr. Bob of 38 5-acre partials on his desks. That was denied. We got a letter. We were forced to sign the letter, which we did not sign within 21 days. That's not fair. I'm not criticizing your decision to go on 40 acres partial in the future. But those of us that were caught a year before your decision to adopt this resolution is not fair to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I pass you the letter?
Yes. Through Natalie. Would any other member of the public like to address the board on this agenda item? Okay, we'll take it now for board comments. Anybody wish to open? Again, I would like to, it seems to me there are three things now in front of us. One is the question of the applicability, is 40/40, et cetera. Secondly, the question of timing and what are there things that sort of fell on the bubble, and if so, how do you define what that is? And thirdly, this is new. It came up during the course of public comment, but was it the board's intent to include industrial projects in this, or was the discussion from around housing, residential? So I would entertain comments on those things and anything else you wish to raise.
Well, I'll give my comments then. I am strongly in favor of the board's current policy. I think a requirement of sewer and water is the preference. If you're not on sewer and water, public sewer and public water, then I think we should have a significant parcel size. I think that for a couple reasons. Number one, as we expand the community centers, the parcel sizes have to be big enough so that the size and scope and scale of the projects will be able to afford the economics of extending roads to county standards, of extending sewer and water lines, of paying sewer and water institutions for their capacity upgrades, et cetera. If we just surround the community centers as we're doing now with 5-acre parcels, then we're just going to get stuck with septics and wells and roads that don't meet county standards without walking trails or paths or any real thinking that goes into what's a community. We're just going to end up with what I would refer to as a whole lot of rural sprawl. And quite frankly, that's what we're seeing, and one of the reasons I'm a big fan or a big supporter of this policy is, at least in my district, you look around and see what's, and we have all these surveys. I love how we do the general plan and we do all these surveys, and yes, everybody wants, as Colleen pointed out, but let's have infill in the community centers, and let's have density there, and let's do all these things, although whenever you propose a project in a community center, half the community shows up and opposes it because that's where the people live. And it's easy to do rural sprawl because nobody's out there, so nobody much opposes it other than a few of us that basically say that this is not a good development scheme for the future. And if you look at least at my district, and getting back to the general plan, one of the goals that it always makes me smile is, my God, we want to have defined community centers, and we want, we don't want them to just grow together, et cetera. Well, we do have defined community centers, and what's growing is 5-acre parcels between them all, and it just goes on and on and on, and we just get more and more what I would refer to rural sprawl, so that you never can develop sewer and water or a planned community in any meaningful sense, and I'm not in favor of that. I've been advocating against that for umpteen years, and I've never found support on the board for what we currently have in place until we had a crisis here a year ago, and this was one of the solutions to that crisis. I am very much, as public policy, maintaining what we currently have in place going forward, and I quite frankly think the minimum parcel size probably should be increased, not decrease given the cost of extending services, public water, public sewer, public roads, pedestrian and bicycle paths, et cetera, that we want to see where we have people living. So that is my very clear direction on policy. I was a big advocate of adopting this when we adopted it. I was a big advocate of adopting something like this many years ago. So let's go to the second question then of timing, and that I have some sympathy toward is to those that were working actively with the county to develop their projects at the time the county policy was put in place. I don't really have any sympathy for those that just want to come in now and say, change the policy so I can go out and develop 5 acres and 10-acre parcels. I'm not in favor of that. So I do have I have a lot of sympathy for those that have a financial commitment that was made based on the old assumption. However, I think they need to be looked at project by project. Mr. Mosby has a project on Pool Station. I mean, a long time ago, the board passed a resolution or a policy basically saying we weren't going to allow parcel splits on roads that were not at an A, B, or C level. So I'm not for doing away with that. I mean, that was many years ago. I think almost Tom Taylor was on the board when we had that discussion and argued back and forth on it. That, my God, we weren't going to have F roads with parcel splits on them. It's going to have to be an A, B, or C road, and I am not in any way wishing to go back and readjust that. That policy was well in place when any of these applications came forward, and it's been in place for probably 15 or 20 years. So I'm for doing it on an individual policy basis, and let me take the two that are in front of us and describe them. Mr. Mosby's is basically a 4-lot split with a 60-acre remainder on a road that will have to be brought up to a C standard, being Pool Station Road. I'm willing to give some flexibility because of the timing on a project like that, because there's a significant enough remainder that as development happens out of San Andres and we expand the community, there's still enough development potential there to extend the sewer and the water and to increase the road capacity if in fact development lowers it below a C standard. We have another one here with a lot of just 5-acre parcels. And just for example, say it's 200 acres and there's 45-acre parcels, since that's an easy description. I am not in favor of approving those kinds of projects. I mean, if it's caught and it's in, and the financial commitment was made, then I think they need to look at something more like a small community water system. So we don't have just 40 parcels with 40 wells. I think they should look and deal with CCWD on both a small community water system and also on perhaps some sort of a batch plant or something for some sort of sewer collection, so that we don't end up with just 40 parcels with 40 wells and 40 septic systems and the like. So I'm not against addressing it, but I think depending on the parcel, it needs to be addressed in the way that most mitigates what we're trying to avoid without crushing the people that operated in good faith. So I think you have to do that basically on a project-by-project basis to see what you can kind of work out so that they can recapture the investments that they've made. But I'm very emphatic that needs to be a project-by-project consideration and try to mitigate the rural sprawl aspects to the extent possible and make sure the roads are to standards, et cetera, as the Public Works Director pointed out. I guess the last question is industrial considerations for industrial zoning. It is my feeling that it was not the board's intent. It certainly was not mine when the board passed this. I don't believe it was any of ours to include industrial at that point. Although I think when we get into the general plan, I think we need to take a very close look at the industrial zoning and where it's located. I do have a concern about doing a lot of industrial without sewer and water availability, and I think that probably depends somewhat on the type of industrial that's being proposed. I much prefer if somebody has a 50-acre industrial zoning that they come up with some sort of an industrial park and an overall scheme of how that's going to be developed, rather than just dividing it into 5-acre parcels and selling it off for industrial without any concept of what we're going to do in this instance. If it were 50 acres with the 10 5-acre parcels and there's no centralized control whatsoever, and we're just going to split it off into 5-acre industrial parcels. So I'm not for that. I don't believe it was the intent of this, but when we get into the general plan, I think we need to come up with a lot better set of policies when it comes to industrial development, so we get some sort of industrial park type concept and we get some overall planning to go over the entire zoning of industrial, and not just cutting it into 5-acre parcels and selling it and saying you're on your own, and no sewer and no water and no central collective system and no anything. And we've got plenty of no anything all throughout the county, and I'm not in favor of that. So that completes my comments.
Thank you, Supervisor Tryon. Other comments? Supervisor Claudino.
As much as it really galls me to say this, I agree almost entirely with Supervisor Tryon. That's a joke.
Swallow hard.
I've got my water right here. But I really do. I think the support for this may have been long coming, but as we showed last year in November, there is an overwhelming support of this policy by the board, and certainly I support this policy to avoid, as is termed, rural sprawl. But I believe that there are some projects that are going to have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. I realize I'm not here to make a determination about specific projects today, but those two examples are illustrated in our staff report here. And the one that involves the larger subdivision, the Spring Valley, as it states right here, had they known of the pending board action, they would have filed the application and worked on the studies after the application was accepted. And for all intents and purposes, why would they not? Also, we have the reference in the actual policy in a couple of places where it says verbatim, the policy shall not be binding with respect to the approval of any specific development application, and the county will continue to consider proposed projects on the merits as presented. It also states, be it further resolved that the adoption of these criteria is advisory only and not binding, and in addition to all other discretionary project application requirements currently in place, including but not limited to applicable environmental review, etc. So even in crafting this policy, the realization was there that there may be projects that have extenuating circumstances. And for me, one of the things that I've always been concerned with is what I term serial conditions. You can imagine in 4 years I've had the opportunity to speak with many people who develop or intend to develop property, and once they get into the process, feel that they have done everything that was initially requested of them, and then a year later, here comes another condition, and a year later, another condition, and pretty soon we're into this 4 or 5 years and way upside down in the process, which leads to some of the criticism is that there's really not a problem with land development. There's a problem with some of our policies or codes. And I tend to agree with that, at least generally. In this case, the letter written by Mr. Peters indicates that when they initially started talking about development of this 35-acre subdivision, that they were actually directed by the county to prepare the additional archaeological assessment, oak woodland assessment, and traffic impact assessment, and so and on, and they went on in good faith to do this. I think it's wrong to change the rules in the middle of the game, and so for certain projects, this may be one of them, I think that timing is a very critical thing. If there is evidence that the county has given direction to an applicant that they need to go spend some money in order to be considered, and then they go spend the money and come back to the county and say, well, that was a good idea then, but right now we're not taking any applications. I don't support that. This also states that by the time the resolution was adopted, they had already spent considerable time, effort, and expense to contract for and assemble the sophisticated mapping and special environmental studies the county told us were required before the application submittal. So those things are all simply influential for me in my particular decision making. So the issue of timing is very important. Mr. Mosby has talked to several of us. I think he's certainly talked to me several times about, and he's well aware of the level of service issue that just can't seem to be avoided, and I believe he's come to accept that right there. But at one time, before our policy was passed, he was told that he could do a four-way split, and given that information, he proceeded. So there may be other projects out there that have similar circumstances, and I'm a very strong believer that when these folks come to the county in good faith to ask exactly what it is they need to do to accomplish their goals, and they are told that there's a commitment there. And if that occurs before we change our policy, I think we should honor our commitment. So I'm in favor of supporting the policy that we have, but the timing is a very important issue. And so I'm sympathetic to those folks that have timing issues. And I also agree with the issue about the industrial. I think this policy was, at the time, made in response to an emergency, for lack of a better term, over establishing residential zoning. And I think this was in response to that, and that we really intended it to deal with the residential properties.
Thank you, Supervisor Claudino. Supervisor Callaway?
I don't want to be redundant. I agree with Tom and Bill. And if it can be proven that staff is given direction and the applicant can prove that they expended X amount of money, not for the purchase of the property, but for studies that were done under direction of county staff, then I'd be willing to consider those on a case-by-case basis. Other than that, I totally support the policy that the board put in November of '07. And on industrial, I would like to look at that a little bit closer, though I agree we still need to look at that for water and sewer also.
Supervisor Thomas.
Well, I would like to go back to discuss this crisis that we were dealing with. There was a perception that, oh my God, we're going too fast. We had some testimony that said that our general plan was not probably the best one in the world. So we adopted this thing called an urgency interim ordinance that basically, if you recall, it simply said that while this is in place, we will not entertain applications that are going to do zone changes. And there was a provision in that urgency interim ordinance that exempted projects that would produce jobs. Do you remember how that was written? So all of a sudden we came down to November 27th, 2007, and we were faced with whether to continue with that urgency interim ordinance or come up with something different. In retrospect, I think what we came up with was far more restrictive than the ordinance that the urgency ordinance that we were working with. It's paradoxical to me that we would have done that in retrospect. What we did is we took a situation where people were able to apply for projects that were consistent with the zoning at that particular time up till November. They were not allowed to apply for projects that were inconsistent with the zoning. In other words, if it was an ag parcel and they wanted to put in, change the zoning and put in residential, then they were absolutely precluded from doing that. And we essentially took that away and put this more restrictive situation where these folks that had assurances that that what you're doing is consistent with the zoning, spent their money, and I think I've heard sympathies that we should exempt these parcels or these applications and let them stand on their own and come forward for our consideration or to the Planning Commission and ultimately to us. But getting back to this suggestion that we had a crisis then, I'm wondering, where is the crisis now? You know, you certainly all must be aware of how long it takes to get projects approved, and I'm very hopeful that at some point that we will come out of the doldrums that we seem to be in, but I would rather have some projects that were pre-approved and ready to build on and have some entrepreneurial spirits that are ready to continue to risk their capital to do economic development in this county, rather than come upon a point when the economic climate is better and then we have to wait for 2 or 2.5 years to get something approved. I'd like to see some reasonable continuity of development in this county that's consistent with the general plan that we have in effect right now. Learned counselor, don't we have an obligation to enforce the general plan that we have now? I mean, you know, and take in applications and process them in conjunction with, I mean, we certainly have latitude in the policy that was adopted in 2007 to do that with you know, to take applications and deal with them. I don't know why we're here.
Shall I respond?
Sure. Yes, go ahead. Was that a
Maybe
question? Or was that a
Yeah, that's a question. I'd like some clarification.
Some other comments that depending on how this was going to end up, I was going to wait on. But first of all, this resolution was very carefully drafted a year ago to make it absolutely clear that we were not amending the general plan, no zoning change, that it did not have the force of law. And it says in 2 different places, the gentleman referred to the one place where it says the policy shall not be binding with respect to the approval of any specific development application, and the county will continue to consider proposed projects on the merits. And it was in there because that's exactly what we're required to do. To do more than that would require all of the process to public notice, the environmental review, all of the things that go into changing the rules. This was very carefully written to make it clear that we were not doing that. At the last paragraph, which hasn't been referred to, says the adoption of these criteria is advisory only and not binding, and in addition to all other discretionary project applications, including but not limited applicable environmental review. So if the goal here is to obtain an exemption from an advisory resolution, there's not much point in doing that, because it's not binding on the board that a year from now, whenever it is, the board that hears and decides these matters on the merits will not be bound by an exemption that's given today to an advisory resolution. So that sort of summarizes everything I was going to say, and I think answers your question.
Well, I just want to make it clear that I have, I am not in agreement with Supervisor Tryon's admonitions against rural sprawl. I mean, we've got people in the audience here that have an organization called Keep It Rural. I mean, they're advocates for ruralness. So why should rural sprawl be something that is to be avoided at all costs? I mean, that's you know, in many ways that's the fabric of our county is these parcels in the country that some of us aspire to own someday. So I would be very much in favor of allowing these folks to proceed. They were told that they could in the beginning. I can see no reason why our action on November 27th should have forestalled their ability to bring their projects forward.
I guess that brings it to me. I'd also like to take a trip in the Wayback Machine to November of 2007. The crisis wasn't made up. This county faces its own studies showing our general plan to be somewhat short of the mark. Some would suggest legally challenged. That's our studies, and we've had a number of lawyers spending a great deal of time letting us know specifically where it seems to have problems, and we've received a number of what I'd consider to be briefs outlining our deficiencies. So the board, mindful of that, and yet under withering criticism from people saying that we had brought on the housing crisis in America and many other things at the time, tried to find a way to continue to do some form of business while at the same time not breaching what I think is some level of consensus on this board, despite differences of ideology, perspective, and nature of our districts. The idea, the expense of rural sprawl, not just visually. Some people think this is a question of aesthetics, but it's also a question of our economics. It's a question of our ability to provide the even fundamental infrastructure necessary to lead decent lives. And you can see where we've fallen short on that by the kinds of conflicts that have engulfed a number of our subdivisions that didn't have that stuff, and that we are now economically unable as a county to provide. So I think we got here honestly. I know that there's a lot of different views of just how we got there. But we are, as you can see in the work schedule behind me, making progress on trying to get a detailed, comprehensive general plan accomplished albeit it's taken us longer than we'd hoped, but we are making progress. And there are many communities, including those that are brought up in these specific plans, that have gone through to great lengths to try to get a more detailed approach and a plan that includes economic as well as housing accommodations that make some logistical and economic sense. So I'll just go down the three issues. Number one, I think it was a well-crafted resolution. It's instructive of the wishes of this board, and we have reiterated that, and I add my name to the three that have already supported that, the intent and the specific language of that resolution. It was artfully constructed in relation to the legal issues at the time and that continue to be facing, and the policy issues even more so that we intended to address and continue to hope that someplace in California will be able to accomplish that rare combination of continuing to be rural and at the same time finding a way to be economically successful. So with that in mind, I also get to the second point, which is that we never in our discussion talked about anything but residential. And my view is that industrial job creation and commercial development was considered to be separate from that, although it's not well reflected in the language. So since we're interpreting policy, and since that policy gave us some leeway, in my view, industrial projects and commercial projects ought to be considered on their merits and carefully in relation to our goals. Do I think that a business park that is based on septic and well water is a well-designed concept in a world of diminishing groundwater? On the surface of it, it looks like it would be kind of challenged that way. But again, if you're looking at individual circumstances, I don't know what this proposal is, and I don't know what the water situation or the septage is like. I would assume that there are experts much more advanced in their thinking than mine to make those decisions. But I don't think we intended to have industrial included in this. As regards timing, I find it difficult. We spent a lot of time talking about the specific date of cutoff, and there was a lead into it, and it was supposed to, at the time, there were supposed to be conveyances to all people we were doing business with that allowed them to know this was coming And whether we succeeded in conveying that, it would appear, given the comments in today's meeting, that we didn't just not succeed, we seem to have failed to make the point clear what the board's intent was to the people who were in progress. I think that requires us, to some extent, it's a moral obligation to take a look at the timing issues. Again, there's a lot of, there's a lot of this kind of ongoing discussion that happens with people thinking, will I apply to something or will I not? But when somebody dumps a lot of money into it and a great deal of time, I think there should be some way to establish criteria that could allow us to make a proper decision about the intent and the level of commitment maybe that the county had at least conveyed in some way, or enough ambiguity to have led people to spend money. I think that's something we need to examine on a case-by-case basis. So again, I'm agreeing with Supervisor Tryon in taking a look at these things. I don't want to be acting in bad faith back at that time. I don't know whether we were able to convey the intent of the board effectively to certain projects. Where that's found and where people had made investments, I think we should show some level of flexibility. However, that doesn't get the applicants off of the understanding that I think you're hearing from this board, which is when projects come to us that have no sustainable basis, that only stretch and cost. People have for a long time thought in this county that if you just build something that helps our economy. Turns out that simple rooftops don't necessarily benefit this economy overall, that the county winds up spending more money on roads, more money on all of its infrastructure, public safety, and the sewer and water stuff is not our responsibility, but that's a drain as well. If you do it efficiently, it works economically, and the equation works just fine. But growth is not necessarily economic development. And economic development is sometimes you can do that in a sustainable and intelligent way. We ought to find our way to that. We keep having this false dichotomy where you're either no growth, and that's the accusation, no growth, or anything goes growth. And what we really need is economic development with some intelligent design here that our communities are already working on. I'm hopeful that this discussion leads to the following things. One is a separate and distinct review with a board statement that industrial was not meant to be part of it. Secondly, criteria that we would ask for the department to develop for board approval that would deal with the timing issue. It can't be just whimsical. We need to have specific criteria based on Board of Supervisors' comments here. And finally, a firm understanding that 40 is 40, that the intent of this board is to prevent the kinds of development that destroy a sense of rural community and damage the local economy. We meant what we said in November. We mean what we say today on that topic, and I think you've heard four of us with no uncertainties involved reiterated.
I have a question. See, I'm not real clear when you say come back to the board with a timing issue.
Yeah, well,
I'm not real clear what you mean by that. I mean, if we look at each case...
The question is whether we are judging cases today, and I'm suggesting no, we should not. We haven't heard great detail. But I'm interested not only in the merits, but I'm interested in the criteria by which we could judge the merits, and I'm asking the...
But do we want to review each one or give direction to staff so that they have it?
I'm interested in reviewing. What I asked for was the department to develop a criteria, that we would review the criteria and ask them to interpret it at the departmental level.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Don't like that, huh?
Actually, no, I actually do, to tell you the truth. This is as close to Solomon-like wisdom as we've ever been able to get. In this case, we really are going to split this baby. I have heard you loud and clear, and I think the public has heard you loud and clear, that 40 means 40. So having set that aside, The next issue is, did we end up with some applications that, because in fact, in an attempt to do an application right, applicants tried to do work in advance so they would design a project well.
That's right.
If the county and the applicants can provide sufficient evidence to say that was a credible attempt that was underway, that your board would be willing to, in fact, accept those applications as though they were timely filed.
That is my understanding from the comments, but we would need to have a resolution of that in a motion.
And in all honesty, we're going to have to come back to you with some examples of what we thought that would be. We would certainly work with these two clients and see if we can help define that. I think it is not a large problem. It is not a large number of people who are in this category. And it's like everything else. There's, at some point, a rule of reason where it's not going to be myself or my staff or planning staff. It's going to be you who makes the ultimate decision. So we'll get that as some sort of a language to you. That would be done, presumably, either in a short period of time so applicants would have something in hand, or we would do it at the time of actually considering the application at the Planning Commission and before the board if it got that far. So there's time to deal with that problem. I think we all acknowledge that this is really a question of were there applications that were not timely filed because they were trying to do the development work that would lead to an appropriate application to file. And we do recognize that. There are people who seriously, they do come work with us. They look at what does it take to get an application that's designed right, rather than just filing a piece of paper and then coming back and recycling it 3 or 4 times. So I do respect and honor the attempts to get good design, and I think your board should recognize that as well. So I think we can deal with that. My intention relative to the industrial was, after this discussion occurred, to come back at a later date, because the problem with industrial is not the industrial. The problem is our industrial zones do, in some instances, provide for a very large residential component. And that's the problem. You know, it's not the industrial, it's not the commercial, it's the intermix of all the residential, or in fact the capacity to use the industrial exclusively for residential.
Is it possible to approve an industrial project and limit specifically on that site the residential potential for it?
Typically, we have a couple of zoning districts that have a very limited residential component, and that's where we're trying to steer people, in all honesty. They're actually more intense, and we would rather see that than the mix of the residential within the industrial. That is not a good model. That is a pretty much a failed model of putting residences in amongst any sort of heavy commercial or industrial zone. And our real preference is to get them out of there and keep them in the residential where they belong.
On the other hand, I suppose if you put them in, in the airplane flights and in heavy noise industrial sites, that it might meet our affordable housing goals at some point, but not the proper way to accomplish that. That's a joke. Looking for levity here. At any rate,
at this point, I think we will proceed with the applications that we have that are timely filed. Clearly, we've got your guidance. I will work with the applicants that we have relative to whether or not they were eligible for being considered timely filed. In that instance, the industrial will face at the time of the actual application. Okay, so I will treat those as they're either timely filed or they're not.
Thank you. Do we need a motion to this effect or not?
I think just direction at this point, because you have to come back. So you're going to come back.
Applications will be brought back to you at some point, and we'll also probably send some clarifying language back to you.
Just one additional, Bob. Number one is I just want to reemphasize, I think some of these need to be looked at on a project by project basis. They're not all the same.
No, we agree.
Secondly, once you identify how many projects there are, just say it's 10. It would be nice to notify each supervisor as to which ones are in their respective districts. In fact, notify the board as to where that there are 10, and this is where they all are, so that we can have a grasp of what we're dealing with. And I would certainly encourage both you and the applicants to work closely with the supervisor from your district. So, okay, that completes my comment.
Thank you. I believe everybody has commented out and that we have instructed our staff to proceed. We now get to that much-awaited review of correspondence, reports, and various matters of concern. We will start with our newly elected or re-elected and supervisor for life, Tom Tryon.
I have no additional comments for the board.
Supervisor Thomas.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, let's see, I am scheduled to go to a Planning Partners workshop tomorrow over in Vacaville, and let's see, there's also a meeting on Friday on the waste and wastewater services on the Highway 4 corridor up at Ironstone Vineyards. I also wanted to make note of the fact that I have attended my second class on the computer training that you recently became aware of at the high school at Bret Harte High. I'm proud to report to you that the classes are still packed with oftentimes 10 or 15 people on a waiting list to get into them. Have a lot of very, very favorable comments about the quality and the quality of instruction. This young man that's teaching the classes, he looked a little bit to me like Mr. Peepers when I first met him, but he comes alive in a classroom situation. He's doing very, very well. Some of the other things that I wanted to talk about is I see that under correspondence, Supervisor Walensky, you have a draft letter here responding to concerns about the animal shelter. Were we going to be talking about that at some point?
Yes, actually, I believe that our this will be under the CAO's correspondence report.
Okay. Let's see. There's also seemingly this request for a response from us from Utica Power Authority that keeps circling around and getting hotter by the moment. Maybe at some time we need to respond to that as well. And then there are some correspondences that we've been getting from one John Morlock from Orange County. Have you been looking at those? I don't know whether this is appropriate to jump into this fray at this particular time, but John is a fellow that he was elected to the Board of Supervisors in Orange County in the same cycle that I was, and I had the privilege of going through this new supervisor training with him. Quite an interesting fellow, as you may know about his background, and he ran unsuccessfully in 1994 for the treasurer's position in Orange County. John lost that election in many ways because he was predicting the ultimate and fairly imminent financial collapse of Orange County, which happened almost immediately upon his successor being elected. So that resulted in a $1.6 billion loss for Orange County. Well, when John Morlock, as a chairman of the Orange County Board of Supervisors, begins to wave his arms and start saying to those of us who also sit as boards of supervisors that we ought to pay close attention to I think it's AB 32 and SB 375 and the terrible financial consequences that may precipitate that those issues may precipitate upon us. At first I thought, well, that It's just, John being Chicken Little again, but I don't know. I am just going to be looking much more closely at what John is saying about that. And huge costs. Huge costs. So anyway, he has been writing these things to you, Supervisor Walensky, asking for for you to respond about whether we want to join his concerns. I don't know. It may warrant some future discussion. I just want to throw it out on the table and see what others think of it. But John's a very bright guy, and I'm not going to ignore him any longer. So, okay, that's all I have to report today.
Supervisor Callaway?
I have a Juvenile Justice Commission meeting this week, Greater Arnold Business Association. I'm not sure if I have a jail meeting. Russ, do you know if we have a jail meeting on the 20th?
I've got it as a question on the 20th. Oh, yes, there is a 1 o'clock. There's actually something at 10 and then later at 1. I cannot go at 10. I'll be at 1.
And those are my board-appointed assignments.
Supervisor Claudino.
The only thing I have to report is Monday, I'll be meeting with Jeannie Boyce and the administrative staff from the Mountain Valley Emergency Medical Services Agency regards their budget crisis. What a crisis is today. So we may see some change in services and or fees if we want to maintain the EMS regional representation we have. So.
All right, thank you. In my correspondence, I'd first like to recognize Supervisor-elect Gary Toffanelli, who's among us today.
Hey, Gary.
You might want to get used to being hypoglycemic at about this hour because sometimes this happens. We also, I have a number of meetings this week, including, I believe, Marita, we have a JPA meeting with family support. Has that been changed? Okay. Must have missed that. Good. Secondly, I have a mother-in-law job training WIB meeting in Sonora on Thursday, and that would complete the meetings for that week. However, there are some important meetings coming up which I'd like to let people know about. The Sierra Nevada Conservancy is going to be convening its board meeting in Calaveras County for the first time, and that will be happening on the 3rd of December. We'll be discussing a number of grant applications, and there will be a tour of Calaveras, which they'll be going on, and I hope some board members and staff might join. CSAC. Yes, I know. CSAC corresponds to this, so I don't know if there's anybody left, but if you are here, this is on the 3rd and 4th of December, Wednesday and Thursday. But we'll be taking them around. They do a visit of various sites. They're going to be talking with the folks who designed the Murphys, the new development of Murphys, and also talk about Copper Mill as
Coppertown Square.
Yeah. Coppertown Square, yes, excuse me. And
the project formerly known as.
We'll be taking them up to, they have funded some of the CHIPS projects, so they'll be visiting with the crew and also taking a look at Love Creek, which is another one of their projects up near Big Trees. So anybody, any staff that wishes to come along, especially on the 3rd, it would be an opportunity to meet their staff and get to know people who are in the process of giving out in the neighborhood of $20 million more to the region, and probably always good to get to know them, especially when they're in our territory. They'll be staying at Couts. That will be where they're holding their meetings. And that's it for my report. And
do we have a holiday schedule, or are we meeting our regular?
We've got an agenda item, I believe, coming up on the 25th. We've got two things. On the 25th, there would be an agenda item canceling the meeting on the 2nd. And also, we're proposing to cancel the meeting on the 23rd. That's been in keeping, I think, with how the board has met. So what we're looking at are December meetings on the 9th and the 16th only. I've already discussed with department heads the likelihood that we would do that and let them know if they have anything for the end of the year, get it in sooner rather than later. So that's all kind of that's been in the pipeline.
So that'll be next week?
Yeah, we meet on the 25th. We're off the 2nd. We're back the 9th. We're back the 16th, and that would be it until January 6th.
16th, I better put that down.
And that will be on your, it's on your board agenda for the 25th to authorize that schedule change.
All right. Would you like to enlighten us on the draft letter that's before us on the animal control issue, which seems to have come up in a timely way?
As you may know, we've received correspondence engendered by the Humane Society with respect to the future of the shelter and conditions there. And I prepared a draft response to be signed by the chair or the county administrator, as the board would deem appropriate, that basically restates where we are with respect to current capital improvements for the shelter. We've got about $193,000 set forth out of a total budget of $250,000 for the year. And it kind of elaborates on some of the financial challenges that face us in the near term, at least. And I think it's responsive to their inquiries. And you can decide how you'd like to go on that. Their draft is out there for your review and discussion. With respect to Utica Power Authority, that's an agenda item on the 25th. There's a draft response from Community Development on that, and so you'll have the ability to review that and act upon that at next week's meeting. And I think that's it.
Actually, I neglected to mention in my report, I'll take it back for a moment, on letters of correspondence that we did send a letter relating to the red-legged frog issue. It was, as many letters written by committee, had a number of different styles and metaphoric flourishes, but did not meet by any means the standards or test of our editor-in-chief, Supervisor Callaway, who had drafted a much thriftier version, the first few sentences of which were added to the volume that the tome that we ultimately submitted. We did cover some issues which some board members felt were not relevant, that is the Williamson Act, the inclusion of the Williamson Act and other things. But the date was late, the numbers of people engaged were legion, and we sent it off as you read it, I hope, in your board packets. If you don't have one, let me know, and Mary Mutz will get a copy to you. And that's all I have. County Council.
Just another reminder that my office is putting on the mandatory ethics training on December 10th. If anybody needs to attend, you can call my office and get on the list.
Does this include supervisors-elect?
He's aware of it. In fact, I think he's planning to attend.
All right. Great. It's a real adrenaline rush. I can verify from attendance last week.
Won't he get that in San Diego?
I don't know.
You can do all of that is during the CSAC conference, but
it'll be part of your curriculum in San Diego.
If it is, then I won't attend. But if it isn't, then I may just attend anyway. It's only 2 hours.
It was primarily set up because we had a lot of inquiries from special districts that weren't getting access to it some other way.
It has nothing to do with ethics.
But it was heavily attended.
Yes. The other thing is, I'd like to
That must be because you didn't fail anybody.
No comment. I'd like to ask you to cancel the item 17, the closed session.
Today's.
We thought we might have some developments. We don't. Nothing to discuss with you. So
I understand there was an arrest at the auction. Never mind. Okay, Madeline. Oh, come on. Come up with something.
How about our board packets for next week? When will they be available? Are they available now? Why don't you hold mine over there and I'll pick it up after lunch?
All right, well, thank you. This means that the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your attendance.
Okay, before you all